Chapter 864. Countless martial artists had already gathered around the square. At a glance, there were at least tens of thousands of people. Among these martial artists, most of them had already reached the life and death realm. There were even some divine force realm martial artists. It seemed like they were here to try their luck. As for old ancestors who had surpassed the life and death realm, although they were rare, Chu Fengmian could count at least a dozen of them. Moreover, there were also some peak life and death realm martial artists who had concealed their strength. Their strength might not be any weaker than ordinary old ancestors. Just like the Yi family's brother and sister beside Chu Fengmian, their strength was probably much stronger than ordinary peak life and death realm martial artists. At the very least, they had the ability to contend against ordinary old ancestors. Possessing such strength at such a young age made Chu Fengmian suspect their identity. If they didn't have any background, it was impossible for them to do all this. However, Chu Fengmian couldn't be bothered to investigate. After all, the Yi family siblings were his friends and not his enemies. As long as they didn't go against him, he wouldn't find trouble with them. On the square, more and more martial artists had gathered. Almost all of them were here for the treasures in the Divine Tree's secret realm. Some of the desolate ancient sect's old ancestors had already appeared and stood before the crowd. Everyone has naturally come to the desolate ancient city for the Divine Tree's secret realm. This Divine Tree trial has been held countless times. You should already know the specific rules. As long as you obtain the treasures, our desolate ancient sect will never seize them. They will all belong to you. However, anyone who enters the Divine Tree secret realm has their own fate. If you die, our desolate ancient sect won't be responsible. An old ancestor coldly spoke, explaining the rules. It didn't take long before he finished. Now, everyone, enter the teleportation array. Before you enter, you will receive a jade talisman. Crush the jade talisman and you will be teleported out of the Divine Tree secret realm. But remember, this jade talisman will take effect for 3 seconds when you crush it. You must crush it when there is no danger. Looking at the martial artists below nodding their heads, the old ancestor loudly spoke. All martial artists set off. In front of the patriarch, a teleportation array was formed. Countless warriors walked into it one after another, and each of them received a jade talisman when they entered. Let's go too, Yi Kai said. Chu Fengmian and the siblings of the Yi family stepped into the teleportation array. While the patriarch was lecturing, Chu Fengmian also noticed that not all the martialists present were itinerant cultivators or even martialists from small forces. There were quite a number of disciples from the 7 major sections. It seemed like the treasures in the Divine Tree secret realm were extremely tempting. Even the disciples of the 7 great sects were not spared. They all wanted to enter and search for treasures. Chu Fengmian stepped into the teleportation array. Suddenly, Chu Fengmian felt a wave of spiritual awareness sweep over him. It seemed that the person wanted to find out Chu Fengmian's identity. The owner of this spiritual awareness was at least an emperor at the 7th step of the life and death steps, the heavenly fate realm. Chu Fengmian knew that this was the desolate ancient sect's inspection. The 7 major sects had many enemies in the 9 regions, especially now that the 6 demon gates had reappeared. The purpose of this inspection was to find out if there were any spies who had sneaked into the Divine Tree mystic realm. After all, the Divine Tree secret realm was the foundation of the desolate ancient sect. Even if the desolate ancient sect was open, they would not let anyone enter without checking. Originally, Chu Fengmian felt that it was strange that the desolate ancient sect would not check and let the martialists enter the teleportation array. Now, it seemed like the desolate ancient sect was deliberately misleading the martialists into entering the teleportation array and letting their guard down. Only then would they be able to inspect properly. It was impossible for the martialists present to resist the spiritual awareness of an emperor. However, that was only for the others. For Chu Fengmian, not to mention an emperor, Even someone at the peak of the 9 regions might not be able to inspect his body. Chu Fengmian's spiritual awareness, having lived 2 lives as a human, was extremely tenacious. With a thought, Chu Fengmian hid all his secrets and only displayed less than 1% of his strength. After letting the spiritual awareness scan him, it did not linger on Chu Fengmian for too long and left. Not long after, the world in front of Chu Fengmian began to spin. The various scenes around him also began to become misty. In the next moment, Chu Fengmian left the teleportation array and entered the Divine Tree secret realm. Chaotic aura, it feels so ancient. The moment Chu Fengmian took a step into the Divine Tree secret realm, he could feel the countless chaotic auras around him. This place, the Divine Tree secret realm, should be a broken continent left behind from ancient times. That was why it contained so much chaotic aura. Later on, it was discovered by the desolate ancient sect and was transformed into the Divine Tree secret realm. After all, the Divine Tree was a branch of the creation tree and used chaotic aura as nutrient. All these treasures should have been born from the primal chaos aura. At a glance, the surroundings of the Divine Tree secret realm felt as if they had returned to the desolate ancient era. They had returned to the desolate ancient era. Everywhere was incomparably ancient. This should be the periphery of the Divine Tree secret realm. There is still a long way to go before I reach the Divine Tree. Chu Fengmian sensed the various things around him and found that the aura of the Divine Tree was still very far away from where he was now. Obviously, the place where Chu Fengmian was first transmitted to was the periphery of the Divine Tree secret realm. The Jade Dew sacred fruit would only grow at the top of the Divine Tree. If Chu Fengmian wanted to find the Jade Dew sacred fruit, he would have to go directly to the Divine Tree. Chu Fengmian instantly determined the direction of the Divine Tree. With a move, he turned into a ray of light and flew directly in the direction of the Divine Tree. The Divine Tree secret realm was incomparably huge. Chu Fengmian traveled continuously for half an hour. Through his spiritual awareness, he could vaguely see an incomparably huge tree. This huge tree pierced through the heavens and the earth. It was almost impossible to see the top, as if the top had already surpassed the world. Chapter 865. This is the sacred tree. It was also Chu Fengmian's first time seeing the sacred tree with his own eyes. Even in countless legends and ancient books, he had heard countless times about the size of the sacred tree. Today, Chu Fengmian was also shocked. Unparalleled. Chu Fengmian had never thought that a tree could grow so big. A towering tree. Moreover, the sacred tree was only a branch of the former builder tree. Compared to the real builder tree, it was only a drop in the ocean. How big is the legendary builder tree that enveloped the entire ancient Barrens continent? Chu Fengmian couldn't help but mutter to himself. In the records, the builder tree was so big that it enveloped the entire ancient Barrens continent. Several branches of the builder tree could be seen anywhere in the ancient Barrens continent. When one raised his head, all he could see was the crown of the builder tree. When the builder tree was shattered, the ancient Barrens continent lost its support. Therefore, it was fragmented later. After seeing the sacred tree in front of him, Chu Fengmian couldn't help but think of the majestic builder tree in the past. Just when Chu Fengmian was still sighing at the size of the sacred tree, a wave of spiritual energy suddenly appeared in front of Chu Fengmian. In the chaotic aura in front of him, a wave of spiritual energy suddenly condensed from nothingness. Then, it directly transformed into a human figure. The moment this human figure condensed, it suddenly blasted a palm towards Chu Fengmian. The condensation of this human figure was almost silent. If it weren't for Chu Fengmian's divine pulse, he could clearly feel the changes in the surrounding spiritual energy. Only then would he discover the abnormality. Otherwise, Chu Fengmian wouldn't have noticed the condensation of this human figure. This is the tree spirit? Chu Fengmian had already heard that the existence of the tree spirit in this divine tree secret realm was extremely strange. It would condense silently and suddenly launch an attack on warriors. In this divine tree secret realm, the chaotic aura was enough to block the spiritual consciousness of warriors. Therefore, the condensation of the tree spirit was almost impossible to notice. The tree spirit in front of him only had the strength of the 4th or 5th level of the divine power realm. However, if it really appeared suddenly, ordinary life and death realm warriors wouldn't be able to react. If he were to be ambushed at that time, he would at least be seriously injured. Moreover, it was said that there were life and death realm and even old ancestor level existences among the tree spirit. If these tree spirits could be formed silently and used for sneak attacks, then ordinary patriarchs would most likely perish in the divine tree secret realm. It was no wonder that the death rate in the divine tree secret realm was so high. 90% of the warriors who entered would only end up dead. The tree spirit was indeed difficult to deal with. Let me see what this tree spirit is. Chu Fengmian's mind flickered, and the spiritual energy of the tree spirit's palm dissipated in front of Chu Fengmian. He waved his hand, and the tree spirit was caught in his palm. Such pure spiritual energy! The tree spirit's spiritual energy is purer than countless spiritual pills. Chu Fengmian could not help but sigh as he felt the pure spiritual energy of the tree spirit. The tree spirit was simply an amalgamation of pure spiritual energy. Such an existence could only be born in the divine tree. Chu Fengmian's mind flickered, and he devoured all of the tree spirit's spiritual energy. He could feel that the tree spirit's spiritual energy was different from ordinary spiritual energy. It contained a part of the divine tree's power. Once devoured, it would not only increase a warrior's strength, but also strengthen their body. To Chu Fengmian, the power of a tree spirit was negligible. However, if he could devour a large number of tree spirits, his body would become even tougher. Let's go. Chu Fengmian's body flickered, and he flew toward the divine tree once again. The appearance of the tree spirit reminded Chu Fengmian that the divine tree secret realm was no less dangerous than the 9 regions' ominous lands. Chu Fengmian had to be extremely careful when exploring alone. If Chu Fengmian encountered a tree spirit with the strength of an ancestor, and he was not aware of it, he could be seriously injured or even killed. It seems that no matter what strength one has, one will encounter danger in the divine tree secret realm. I can only be extremely cautious. Chu Fengmian focused all of his attention on the divine pulse. The divine pulse could sense the changes in the surrounding spiritual energy. Although the spiritual energy fluctuations of the tree spirits were slight, they still could not escape the divine pulse's senses. Chu Fengmian came to the divine tree secret realm with the help of the divine pulse, so it was easier for him than ordinary warriors. However, Chu Fengmian still could not let down his guard. Chu Fengmian flew along the way, and he saw many warriors' corpses. Their empty rings were still intact, but the essence blood in their bodies had been completely sucked dry. Needless to say, all of this was done by the tree spirit. For the tree spirits, the warrior's blood essence was their best nourishment. Therefore, these tree spirits would gather and attack the warriors. And if the ancient martial art practitioners attacked, then these empty rings would naturally not be left behind. Chu Fengmian's figure slowly descended and arrived beside the warrior's corpse. With a wave of his hand, the empty ring was caught in his palm. However, the moment Chu Fengmian grabbed the empty ring, countless spiritual energy fluctuations suddenly appeared in the surroundings. 5 or 6 tree spirits appeared beside Chu Fengmian and charged at him. These 5 or 6 tree spirits seemed to have been hiding around the warrior's corpse from the beginning, waiting for their prey. This empty ring was the bait, and Chu Fengmian was their prey. Oh! Seeing this scene, Chu Fengmian's eyes revealed some surprise. He did not expect these tree spirits to know how to set up trap. Originally, Chu Fengmian thought that these tree spirits were existences without consciousness. He did not expect them to know how to set up trap. These 5 or 6 tree spirits were around the first level of life and death realm. The closer they were to the divine tree, the stronger the tree spirit's strength would be. If they launched a sneak attack together, Even a peak life and death realm warrior would find it extremely troublesome. The moment Chu Fengmian picked up the empty ring, these 5 or 6 tree spirits suddenly attacked. They wanted to take advantage of Chu Fengmian's most relaxed moment to launch a sneak attack. Chapter 866. Although this method was effective against other warriors, it was meaningless against Chu Fengmian. The moment the spiritual energy hit Chu Fengmian's body, a dragon's roar suddenly erupted from Chu Fengmian's body. It completely shattered this wave of spiritual energy. "You're courting death." Chu Fengmian turned his head. His eyes were extremely cold. A wave of spiritual energy condensed in Chu Fengmian's palm and suddenly swept over. Chu Fengmian's palm struck out. The spiritual energy directly turned into a storm and swept over. Under this palm, the tree spirits were all crushed and turned into pure spiritual energy, which was directly devoured by Chu Fengmian. It seems that these tree spirits have learned some tactics in their battles with the warriors. These tree spirits were much more difficult to deal with than Chu Fengmian had imagined. Their figures were extremely mysterious. Although Chu Fengmian had the divine pulse, he could only sense the tree spirits when they condensed their spiritual energy. If the tree spirits were hiding beside Chu Fengmian, then Chu Fengmian would not be able to find them. This divine tree secret realm is really strange. I'd better get the Jade Dew sacred fruit as soon as possible. Chu Fengmian stopped thinking about it. His current goal was to get the Jade Dew sacred fruit. He did not want to care about the various things in the divine tree secret realm. Chu Fengmian's figure moved again and directly flew in the direction of the divine tree. Along the way, Chu Fengmian did not pay attention to the conflicts he encountered. He flew in the direction of the divine tree with all his strength. After a few hours, the divine tree in Chu Fengmian's eyes finally became incomparably huge. He was much closer to the divine tree. The closer he got to the divine tree, the more Chu Fengmian felt the astonishing vitality emitted from the divine tree. It could be said that the divine tree was an almost immortal existence. Even if it was broken, it would probably be able to recover in an instant. The vitality of the divine tree could be said to be 1,000,000 times, or even 10,000,000 times that of a warrior. With such an abnormal vitality, it almost meant that it was an immortal existence. If anyone could plunder the power of the divine tree, they would probably become the most terrifying figure in the 9 regions. However, although the sacred tree appeared to be extremely calm, the aura emitted from its body was extremely terrifying. Even Chu Fengmian would fall if he angered the divine tree. It was just that the divine tree usually had no intention of attacking. It had always been accumulating its own power and did not have its own consciousness. It would not attack martialists. Otherwise, the desolate ancient sect would have long been destroyed by the divine tree instead of being used by the ancient sect. The Jade Dew sacred fruit is on the crown of this divine tree. Chu Fengmian came to the edge of the divine tree and suddenly raised his head. His figure soared into the sky and turned into a beam of light, flying directly into the sky. The height of the divine tree was simply unimaginable. It pierced through the clouds, and Chu Fengmian's escape light penetrated through the clouds countless times. Along the way, Chu Fengmian also discovered many warriors. They seemed to have the same thoughts as Chu Fengmian. They all wanted to charge towards the treetop of the divine tree. The Jade Dew sacred fruit was not only enough to refine the Jade Dew life breaker elixir, but also the ability to break through the bottleneck of a martial artist. Although the effect was not as strong as the Jade Dew life breaker elixir, it was still a fatal attraction to countless warriors. Chu Fengmian glanced over and saw a group of warriors beside him. There were a total of 6 of them, and they all wore the same clothes. They seemed to be a group of warriors. Although Chu Fengmian did not recognize the group of warriors, it was obvious that they had teamed up to explore the Divine Tree secret realm. The Divine Tree secret realm was filled with dangerous people. If one explored it with other warriors, the risk would naturally be reduced. Therefore, many warriors chose to form groups and explore it together. Chu Fengmian was not surprised to encounter a group of warriors here. It should be known that every time the Divine Tree's secret realm opened, there would be tens of thousands of warriors entering. Most of these people's target was the Divine Tree. Therefore, it was not rare to encounter warriors around the Divine Tree. There's actually someone here? He dares to explore the Divine Tree's secret realm alone. The moment Chu Fengmian noticed the group of warriors, these warriors also noticed Chu Fengmian's existence. Their eyes flickered as they sized up Chu Fengmian. His strength is not bad. Peak life and death realm. Since this lad is exploring alone and has survived until now, he must have had a great fortuitous encounter. Let's subdue this lad first. Exploring the Divine Tree's secret realm is full of danger. Subdue this lad and let him help us explore as a slave. This conversation was completed in an instant. Suddenly, several pairs of eyes looked towards Chu Fengmian. Sir, please wait. The figures of these warriors suddenly approached Chu Fengmian and besieged him. Sir, exploring the Divine Tree's secret realm alone is still a little dangerous. Why don't you cooperate with us to explore the Divine Tree's secret realm? A martialist sneered as he looked at Chu Fengmian. As long as you are obedient, we will not do anything to you. Cooperate? How can we cooperate? Chu Fengmian sneered when he heard the warriors' words. Although they were using their spiritual senses to converse, ordinary martial artists could not hear them at all. But to Chu Fengmian, how could their conversation escape Chu Fengmian's ears? Chu Fengmian naturally knew the thoughts of these martial artists clearly. Chu Fengmian did not expect that these warriors would treat him as prey in the Divine Tree's secret realm instead of hunting other warriors. A kind person would be bullied. This principle was indeed applicable everywhere. Oh? It's simple. You will come with us and help us explore the path in front. We will follow you from behind. The warrior said with a smile. What do you think, sir? Is that so? So, you're here to use me as a shield? Chu Fengmian's lips curled into a playful smile as he said with a smile. I didn't expect you to be so tactful. That's right, we'll let you be our shield. If you do a good job and don't die, we'll share some of the treasures with you. It's not impossible. Another venerable one said coldly as he looked at Chu Fengmian. Chapter 867. I'm not interested. Chu Fengmian said casually. Is that so? Chu Fengmian's direct refusal was also unexpected to those warriors. The strength of this group of warriors was around the peak of life and death realm. They came to the Divine Tree's secret realm to look for an opportunity to break through. 6 against 1. Under such circumstances, there was almost no other choice. They had already spoken so clearly. Yet, Chu Fengmian still refused them without the slightest hesitation. Kid, you don't have the qualifications to refuse, do you understand? You still want to leave? Let's see if you still have the ability to leave. A warrior fiercely said to Chu Fengmian. Seeing that you're quite sensible, I originally wanted to give you a way out, but I didn't expect you to be so stupid. But it doesn't matter, I'll subdue you first and turn you into a slave. The moment he opened his mouth, countless amounts of spiritual energy suddenly appeared beside Chu Fengmian and formed a magic array. Chu Fengmian's body was trapped in the array. If you ask me, we don't need to talk nonsense with this kid. Just subdue him and make him our slave, so we don't have to waste our breath. Another woman said in a vicious tone. Sigh, I originally wanted to let you guys go this time, but I didn't expect you to be so stupid. You think you can deal with me with just a bunch of trash? As Chu Fengmian spoke, his face changed, and his eyes were filled with killing intent. He originally wanted to give this group of warriors a chance, but since they didn't cherish it, there was no need to waste his breath. All of you die. When Chu Fengmian spoke, his aura was completely different from before. Just a moment ago, Chu Fengmian's aura was no different from an ordinary peak life and death realm martial artist. But now, Chu Fengmian's aura was several times more terrifying than before. He's hiding his strength. What a terrifying aura! Who is this kid? The moment these warriors felt the change in Chu Fengmian's aura, their faces changed, and they no longer had that relaxed expression. Don't think too much about it. Anyway, it doesn't matter how strong this kid is. After all, he is a life and death realm martial artist. With the 6 of us joining hands, killing him will be as easy as flipping our hands. The woman spoke again. Her tone was extremely vicious. Once we kill her, extract her soul, and refine it, we'll naturally know who she is. Extracting souls and refining them? Chu Fengmian said coldly upon hearing the woman's words. Very well, it seems like you like this method very much. Since that's the case, I'll fulfill your wish. Boom! Chu Fengmian's body moved. The moment his body moved, he disappeared from where he stood. This sudden disappearance caused the gazes of the martialists to flicker involuntarily as they searched for the location. However, the next moment they were met with a miserable shriek. The woman's chest was pierced through by a palm. Then, the woman's body was shattered by the palm. Chu Fengmian grabbed a transparent soul from the broken body and held it in his hand. A ball of golden dragon flame ignited in Chu Fengmian's palm. Ah! The woman's ear-piercing wail directly entered the ears of the martialists present. Damn it! Kill this kid! Kill! When the other warriors saw that the woman had died in Chu Fengmian's hands, their faces were filled with rage. They were furious to the extreme. Countless martial skills fell from the sky and bombarded Chu Fengmian. These martialists had obviously known each other for a long time. They joined hands to deal with Chu Fengmian. Their martial skills were combined in an orderly manner. It seemed like it would take a long time for them to achieve this. The 5 of them joined hands and unleashed countless martial skills. Even an ordinary ancestor would have to retreat when facing such power. However, Chu Fengmian didn't care at all. His expression didn't change at all. A battle dragon claw condensed above his head and bombarded the 5 martialists. The battle dragon claw struck out in the sky and caused a shock. Suddenly, the martial skills that the 5 martialists had condensed were crushed by the battle dragon claw. The vibrating spiritual energy struck the chests of the 5 cultivators, causing them to be sent flying. Chu Fengmian waved his hand again, and a gust of spiritual energy shot out into the air. It transformed into a violent storm in the air, and directly engulfed the 5 warriors. Their bodies were drawn into the storm, and all of them were forcibly torn apart. All of their empty rings fell into Chu Fengmian's hands. Chu Fengmian found more than 20 empty rings from the 5 martialists. The owners of these empty rings were obviously not them. He didn't know that these martialists had killed many other martialists before this. However, this time, they were unlucky to have provoked Chu Fengmian. However, when Chu Fengmian was about to collect their blood essence, a sudden change occurred. After the blood essence of these martialists scattered in the air, it all disappeared. Chu Fengmian felt that the blood essence seemed to have been directly collected by an existence. Something is strange. Chu Fengmian's eyes revealed a bit of surprise. It wasn't impossible for any martialist to snatch food from the tiger's mouth from Chu Fengmian's hands. However, if any martialist wanted to do all this, Chu Fengmian would definitely know. It was just a question of whether Chu Fengmian had the ability to stop this. However, this time, the blood essence of these martialists had been collected without Chu Fengmian noticing. This kind of silent effect was most likely tree spirit? Only the tree spirit of the divine tree secret realm could do all this. Or perhaps it was the divine tree itself? Chu Fengmian's mind moved. He suddenly scanned the surroundings and saw that there seemed to be many tree roots hidden in the surrounding chaotic aura. These tree roots were usually hidden in the chaotic aura. It was very difficult for martialists to notice them. On these tree roots, one could actually vaguely feel some blood essence. It was the blood essence of the martialists that Chu Fengmian had just killed. This divine tree has been swallowing the blood essence all this time? Chu Fengmian spread out his consciousness again and shrouded the surroundings of the divine tree. He noticed that the surroundings of the divine tree no, the entire Divine Tree's secret realm, were densely packed with invisible roots. As long as a martialist died, all of their blood essence would be collected by the Divine Tree. Chapter 868. The Tree of God is absorbing spiritual energy in such a frenzied manner? Chu Fengmian observed for a full 5 minutes before he finally stopped. He originally thought that the Tree of God was only devouring blood essence. But now, it seemed that the Tree of God wasn't just devouring blood essence, but also spiritual energy. The Tree of God was one of the branches of the Builder Tree. With its vitality, it didn't need to devour any spiritual energy to live forever. It was a near-immortal existence. He didn't expect the Tree of God to be devouring spiritual energy in such a frenzied manner. The Tree of God absorbed the blood essence of the warriors who died in the Tree of God's domain. Everything was out of the ordinary. In particular, the appearance of these tree spirits was almost illusory. They were born without any signs. Chu Fengmian was also puzzled at the appearance of these tree spirits. But now, it seemed that these tree spirits were most likely created by the Tree of God. The Divine Tree had created these tree spirits in order to borrow the tree spirit's strength to kill warriors and devour their blood essence. At least, most of the warriors in the Tree of God's domain had died in the hands of the tree spirit. This made Chu Fengmian even more suspicious. Chu Fengmian even faintly felt that all of this had something to do with the desolate ancient sect. This was because the opening of the Divine Tree's secret realm was initiated by the desolate ancient sect. Now that the Tree of God had gathered tree spirits and was massacring in the Divine Tree's secret realm, Chu Fengmian felt that all of this was done intentionally by the desolate ancient sect. Indeed, the opening of the Divine Tree's secret realm is out of the ordinary. The desolate ancient sect wouldn't allow people to enter and benefit from it for no reason. Chu Fengmian thought to himself. He didn't expect to encounter such an unusual event in the Divine Tree's secret realm. But now that the Tree of God was devouring spiritual energy in such a frenzied manner, there must be something hidden within. To Chu Fengmian, this wasn't a bad thing. As long as it was related to the Tree of God, it wouldn't be a small matter. Moreover, Chu Fengmian could vaguely guess that the desolate ancient sect's goal was to completely control the Tree of God. If the desolate ancient sect had always wanted to use the Tree of God to expand, they wouldn't have done this. It was very likely that the desolate ancient sect felt that the time was ripe and wanted to take control of the Divine Tree. Apart from this, there was no other reason for the desolate ancient sect to do such a thing. Anyone who can obtain the power of the Divine Tree will stand at the top of the 9 regions. Since the desolate ancient sect wants to control the Divine Tree, why don't I interfere? I might be able to benefit from it. Chu Fengmian pondered and quickly came up with a plan. The desolate ancient sect was one of Chu Fengmian's greatest enemies. Even if he couldn't benefit from it this time, it was worth it for him to destroy the desolate ancient sect's plan. Chu Fengmian's body moved again and continued to fly toward the canopy above. This treetop was the core of the Divine Tree, and it was because of this that the dew-sacred fruit grew in the treetop. As long as Chu Fengmian could reach the treetop, he would be able to observe the reason for the change in the Divine Tree and the desolate ancient sect's plan. Along the way, Chu Fengmian encountered many warriors. However, as long as these warriors did not provoke Chu Fengmian ignored them all. After all, with Chu Fengmian's wealth, these life and death realm martial artists, and even some old ancestors, were nothing in his eyes. Chu Fengmian couldn't be bothered to go on a killing spree. Right now, his goal was the Divine Tree and the dew-sacred fruit. The dew-sacred fruit was Chu Fengmian's goal in the Divine Tree secret realm. However, there were some martial artists who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. When they saw Chu Fengmian by himself, they wanted to attack him. Chu Fengmian didn't have any mercy for these people. He killed them all easily. Chu Fengmian's current strength was close to the sovereigns. If he used the Sword Sovereign Palace, those sovereigns of the Heavenly Fate realm wouldn't be able to kill him. Therefore, Chu Fengmian didn't encounter any danger along the way. Gradually, the treetop became bigger and clearer. Chu Fengmian had already pierced through the clouds. Above the clouds was a chaotic void. Apart from the treetop of the divine tree, there was almost nothing else. Go! The closer he got to the treetop, the greater the pressure Chu Fengmian felt. However, Chu Fengmian didn't have the slightest intention to retreat. He condensed his spiritual power, and his speed increased countless times as he rushed up. Bam! In the next moment, Chu Fengmian's body arrived at the treetop. There's actually someone on the treetop? The moment Chu Fengmian rushed up to the treetop, he felt countless auras. There seemed to be many martial artists on the treetop. As he looked around, he saw that there were at least a few dozen cultivators. These dozens of people were divided into different forces. They were all united, and there were a total of 6 forces. There's actually someone rushing up. He's actually alone? The moment Chu Fengmian rushed up to the treetop, countless spiritual consciousnesses swept towards Chu Fengmian. When they saw that Chu Fengmian was alone, these martial artists couldn't help but look over with some surprise in their eyes. To rush up to the treetop, one had to endure extremely great pressure. When they rushed up, they all joined forces and rushed up. Now that Chu Fengmian was rushing up alone, it naturally attracted their attention. Desolate Ancient Sect, Ancient Moon Canyon, Medicine King Valley, Tianjian Sect. Chu Fengmian glanced over and saw martial artists from 4 of the forces. They were from these 4 sections. The remaining 2 forces didn't originate from the 7 major sects, but were formed by the union of some genius martial artists from smaller sections. These 6 forces were all on the treetop. They seemed to be in a stalemate, and also seemed to be waiting for something. However, when Chu Fengmian's gaze swept across the treetop, he quickly understood what they were waiting for. In the center of the treetop, on a branch, a purple fruit the size of a fist could be seen clearly. This purple fruit was covered with extremely complex patterns, and it contained a terrifying amount of spiritual power. The Jade Dew Sacred Fruit. This was the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit born by the Creation Tree. At this moment, the patterns on the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit seemed to be incomplete. This meant that the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit had yet to fully mature. Chapter 869. Above the treetop, the 6 factions were in a deadlock because of the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit. The Jade Dew Sacred Fruit could not only be used to refine the Jade Dew life-breaking pill, but it could also allow the majority of peak life and death experts to break through. In the history of the 9 regions, there was no lack of extremely talented geniuses who were stuck at the peak of life and death realm. Even after using countless methods, they were still unable to break through. The heavens were fair. Generally, the more talented a martial artist was, the more difficult it would be for them to break through. For example, some monstrous geniuses had the ability to kill old ancestors at the peak of life and death realm. However, if they wanted to transcend life and death and break through, it would be dozens or even hundreds of times more difficult than ordinary martial artists. These monstrous geniuses could not break through, but with the help of the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit, they could easily break through life and death and step onto the life and death step. The value of a Jade Dew Sacred Fruit was sky-high in the outside world. For Chu Fengmian, the difficulty of transcending life and death was thousands or even tens of thousands of times more difficult than ordinary life and death experts. It was impossible for Chu Fengmian to break through with his own strength. Therefore, he wanted to refine Saint-grade spirit pills, Jade Dew life-breaking pill, to defy the heavens. Chu Fengmian looked at the surrounding martial artists and saw that they had already known about the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit's ripening. Therefore, they had rushed to the treetop from the start and remained in a deadlock because the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit had yet to ripen. Fortunately, the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit had yet to ripen, which allowed Chu Fengmian to rush over. Looking at the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit's appearance, it would not take long for it to ripen completely. If Chu Fengmian had delayed a little longer, he might not have been able to reach the jade dew sacred fruits ripening. At that time, Chu Fengmian would have wanted to cry, but no tears would come out. There was only one jade dew sacred fruit in the entire divine tree. The value of the jade dew sacred fruit was self-evident. At the very least, all the martial artists present were looking at the jade dew sacred fruit with burning eyes. Even some old ancestors were the same. To these patriarchs, this jade dew sacred fruit might not be of any help to them, but it was enough to exchange for an astronomical amount of wealth. Obtaining the jade dew sacred fruit was equivalent to obtaining a huge treasure. Who would want to give it up? This brat actually managed to rush up alone. Looks like he does have some strength. While Chu Fengmian was pondering, the gazes of those warriors were already sizing Chu Fengmian up. There was hostility and surprise. They were all discussing with each other. The fact that he was able to rush up to the top of the tree by himself had indeed surprised them. However, most of the gazes were filled with disdain. It was as if they did not put Chu Fengmian in their eyes at all. The appearance of a single cultivator was of no threat to these forces. After all, no matter how strong an honorable martial artist was, how strong could he be? Among the 6 great forces, there was no lack of patriarchs who had transcended life and death. Chu Fengmian's cultivation base was merely at the peak of life and death realm. They had never placed him in their eyes. Everyone, this divine tree belongs to our desolate ancient sect. This jade dew sacred fruit should also belong to our desolate ancient sect. In this stalemate, one of the desolate ancient sect's patriarchs suddenly spoke. Everyone, please leave. Old ancestor Baron Cloud, aren't the rules of the divine tree trial set by your desolate ancient sect? All the treasures obtained in the divine tree secret realm belong to whoever obtains them. Just as the old ancestor Baron Cloud finished speaking, a mocking voice rang out. Among the warriors beside him, an old ancestor from the Tianjian sect sneered. Your desolate ancient sect wants to make us leave with just a few words? How is that possible? If you want us to leave, sure. As long as you hand over the jade dew sacred fruit to our Tianjian sect, we'll leave the divine tree secret realm obediently. How about it? The words of the Tianjian sect's old ancestor caused the old ancestor Baron Cloud's face to darken. Hand over the jade dew sacred fruit? In the divine tree secret realm, the most valuable treasure was the jade dew sacred fruit. With the jade dew sacred fruit, the Tianjian sect's disciples would naturally return with a full load. What else was there to talk about? Old ancestor Baron Cloud, you don't have to waste your energy. This jade dew sacred fruit belongs to whoever is capable. Among the warriors from the Valley of the Medicine Masters, an old ancestor also spoke up. But before that, everyone, it's better to get rid of this brat first. The old ancestor of the Valley of the Medicine Masters suddenly stretched out his hand and pointed at Chu Fengmian. This brat is alone. He doesn't have the right to compete with us for the jade dew sacred fruit. Let's knock him down from the treetop first, lest he tries to fish in troubled waters. The old ancestor of the Valley of the Medicine Masters was a middle-aged man. He didn't look old, but he had become an old ancestor at such a young age. Naturally, he was one of the geniuses of the Valley of the Medicine Masters. He looked at Chu Fengmian with disdain. Brat, know your place. This jade dew sacred fruit isn't something you can get your hands on. Get lost now. Oh! Chu Fengmian stood where he was. He didn't expect the people from the Valley of the Medicine Masters to come looking for trouble with him. Now that the 6 factions were in a deadlock, no one dared to make the first move. But now that Chu Fengmian was alone and standing there, he was a classic example of a pushover. It seemed that the people from the Valley of the Medicine Masters wanted to make an example out of Chu Fengmian. The warriors from the other factions also fell silent when they heard the old ancestor of the Valley of the Medicine Masters speak. This action was a tacit agreement with the old ancestor of the Valley of the Medicine Masters. The 6 factions were here to compete for the jade dew sacred fruit. Chu Fengmian was alone and didn't have the right to stand beside them and compete with them. If Chu Fengmian didn't make a move, everyone would really think of him as a pushover and want to take advantage of him. Trash from the Valley of the Medicine Masters. You want me to get lost? Do you think you have the right to do so? Chu Fengmian sneered. 6 factions? Chu Fengmian didn't think much of the 6 factions combined. It was just that the Jiuyu sacred fruit wasn't ripe yet, so Chu Fengmian couldn't be bothered to make a move. After all, this was the hidden realm of the divine tree. If Chu Fengmian made a move, he might attract the attention of the barren ancient sect. Before he obtained the Jiuyu sacred fruit, Chu Fengmian didn't want to be so ostentatious. But teaching a lesson to a few trash from the Valley of the Medicine Masters wasn't enough for Chu Fengmian to make a move. Trash from the Valley of the Medicine Masters? As soon as Chu Fengmian finished speaking, the faces of the Valley of the Medicine Masters turned cold. Chapter 870. Trash from the Valley of the Medicine Masters. Chu Fengmian's words silenced the voices of those present. The atmosphere was so tense that it reached freezing point. What an arrogant kid! Interesting, very interesting. I wonder where this lunatic came from. Apart from the disciples of the Valley of the Medicine Masters, the other warriors began to discuss after hearing Chu Fengmian's words. Their expressions were as if they were ready to watch a good show. As for the disciples of the Valley of the Medicine Masters, their expressions changed from cold to angry when they heard the discussions. They never thought that Chu Fengmian would dare to speak in such a way. Since when did someone dare to challenge the dignity of the 7 major sects? Trash? How dare you call our Valley of the Medicine Masters trash? Kid, you're too arrogant. The elder of the Valley of the Medicine Masters who had spoken earlier was even more furious. All the spiritual energy in his body had already exploded. Die for me. The elder of the Valley of the Medicine Masters did not hesitate to attack. His realm had already reached the 3rd step of the life and death steps, the immortal realm. As soon as he attacked, an extremely dense spiritual energy bombarded Chu Fengmian. This spiritual energy was so dense that it seemed to want to shatter Chu Fengmian's body in front of it. It could be said that the elder of the Valley of the Medicine Masters did not hesitate to use his full strength. Under such anger, he did not intend to give Chu Fengmian any more time. This move was to kill Chu Fengmian. It seems that everyone in the 9 regions dares to challenge the dignity of the 7 major sects. Kid, go to hell! The elder of the Valley of the Medicine Masters roared angrily. Countless spiritual energies had already enveloped Chu Fengmian's body, trapping him and leaving him with no way to escape. However, from the very beginning, Chu Fengmian had no intention of running away. A mere immortal realm warrior was not qualified to force Chu Fengmian to flee. What a joke! So what if I trample the dignity of the 7 major sects under my feet today? Chu Fengmian's face was extremely calm in the face of the attack of countless spiritual energies. Waves of pure spiritual energy also condensed from Chu Fengmian's body. Chu Fengmian's fist suddenly struck out. As the spiritual energy blasted out, it transformed into a violent storm in the air. The spiritual energy of the Valley of the Medicine Masters Patriarch was swept away by the storm. His body was caught in the storm in an instant. What? What happened? Medicine Capital's ancestor was defeated just like that. One move, just one move, how is this possible? Where did this brat come from? How can his spiritual energy be so strong? In terms of spiritual power, he is even stronger than Yao Jing, who is in the longevity realm. How did he do it? Seeing the changes in this move, the other warriors were stunned, especially the Medicine King's Valley disciples. They had originally wanted to see how the Medicine Capital Patriarch would kill Chu Fengmian when he made his move. After all, Medicine Capital's old ancestor was a longevity realm old ancestor. Wouldn't dealing with an unknown peak life and death realm martial artist be a piece of cake? Who would have thought that such a situation would occur? Damn it! Caught in the storm, Medicine Capital's old ancestor regained his senses in an instant. He had just attacked in anger and did not put Chu Fengmian in his eyes. In his opinion, killing a peak life and death realm martial artist like Chu Fengmian was a piece of cake, so he did not use his full strength. After being caught in the storm, Medicine Capital's old ancestor finally recovered. After all, he was an old ancestor who had transcended life and death. Encountering danger made him immediately sober up. "Brat, I didn't expect you to be hiding your strength. But it doesn't matter. No matter how much strength you have hidden, you will die here today," Medicine Capital's old ancestor said angrily as a mirror appeared in his hand. In the mirror, golden threads suddenly appeared. At a glance, there were a total of 3,000 golden threads. The moment these 3,000 golden threads appeared, the storm around Medicine Capital's old ancestor was completely broken. At the same time, these 3,000 golden threads directly bombarded Chu Fengmian's body after breaking through the storm. 3,000 golden illusion mirror. Seeing Medicine Capital's old ancestor make a move, everyone was shocked. This 3,000 golden illusion mirror is an extremely famous heaven-grade spirit artifact in Medicine King Valley. It's actually in Medicine Capital's old ancestor's hands. It seems like Medicine King Valley is determined to get the Jade Dew sacred fruit. Otherwise, they wouldn't hand over such a valuable spirit artifact to Medicine Capital's old ancestor. The 3,000 golden threads condensed from this 3,000 golden illusion mirror are not inferior to a full-powered attack from a life-shattering old ancestor. Even an old ancestor would not be able to withstand the combined attack of 3,000 golden threads. This brat is merely at the peak life and death realm. It seems like it's over. Medicine Capital's old ancestor took out this spirit artifact. He won't give this brat any chance. Seeing Medicine Capital's old ancestor take out the 3,000 golden illusion mirror, everyone felt that the battle was over. These 3,000 golden threads were extremely troublesome even for some old ancestors, let alone Chu Fengmian, a mere peak life and death realm martial artist. However, the next scene was beyond everyone's expectations. Facing the 3,000 golden threads, Chu Fengmian's expression remained calm. He suddenly punched out, bombarding the 3,000 golden threads. "Is this brat crazy? Catching 3,000 golden threads with his bare hands? Even a body cultivator wouldn't dare to be so crazy." Before these exclamations could fade away, all the martial artists present obediently shut their mouth. The 3,000 golden threads slashed at Chu Fengmian's hand, but there wasn't the slightest trace of injury. It was as if the golden threads had slashed at a hard rock. Chu Fengmian made a grabbing motion, and the 3,000 golden strands were forcibly torn apart by Chu Fengmian. 3,000 golden threads attacking together represented 3,000 life-shattering old ancestors attacking at the same time. Chu Fengmian had actually blocked such a terrifying attack with his bare hands? He had even forcibly torn apart the 3,000 golden threads? Such strength was simply beyond the knowledge of countless martial artists present. Could a peak life and death realm martial artist's strength really reach such a terrifying level? Even the core geniuses of the 7 great sects who have been nurtured since childhood can't reach such a level. Only the most monstrous of geniuses can do all this. How is this possible? The Tianjian sect's old ancestor exclaimed in shock. Chapter 871. The geniuses of the 7 great sects could be considered the most monstrous geniuses in the entire 9 regions. However, there were very few who could achieve this. Moreover, these geniuses were all famous existences in the 9 regions. Just like this, an unknown cultivator had suddenly appeared and possessed such strength. How could he accept this? Of course, the one who found it the most difficult to accept was the Medicine Capital Patriarch. Facing Chu Fengmian, he had already regarded him as an opponent, which was why he had taken out the 3,000 gold illusion mirror. It should be known that the Medicine King Valley had specially bestowed this mirror to him so that he could use it to fight for the jade dew sacred fruit. He had used the mirror to deal with Chu Fengmian because he was extremely afraid of him. But now, the 3,000 gold illusion mirror had been forcibly torn apart by Chu Fengmian, turning it into a piece of trash. He had destroyed a heaven-grade spiritual artifact with his bare hands. Chu Fengmian, who was in the air, suddenly struck out with his palm. The spiritual power contained in the Medicine Capital Patriarch's body was almost completely destroyed at this moment. His spiritual veins, body, and internal organs were completely destroyed by this palm. Although an immortal realm patriarch could recover from this kind of injury in an instant, it was still not enough to withstand the pain. However, this kind of pain couldn't be offset, especially when he was defeated by a life-and-death realm martial artist in front of so many people. All of this was unbearable for the Medicine Capital Patriarch. "Kid, just you wait. I'm going to kill you. The enmity between us is absolutely irreconcilable. One day, I will trample you under my feet and humiliate you." The Medicine Capital Patriarch roared fiercely at Chu Fengmian. His body moved, wanting to return to the group of Medicine King Valley disciples. "Trying to escape? Did I give you permission to escape?" Chu Fengmian sneered and suddenly waved his hand. The space around the Medicine Capital Patriarch was firmly locked. No matter how much spiritual power he channeled, there was nowhere for him to escape. "Kid, what are you trying to do?" The Medicine Capital Patriarch roared furiously at Chu Fengmian. He originally thought that Chu Fengmian had already humiliated him by defeating him in front of everyone. After all, the Medicine Capital Patriarch was a disciple of one of the 7 great sections. Even the patriarchs of the 7 great sects wouldn't go overboard and deal with him. Countless patriarchs understood the principle of leaving a way out. However, Chu Fengmian was an exception. Chu Fengmian had never thought of leaving a way out. To deal with enemies, he only had one choice: to trample them to death. As for the Medicine Capital Patriarch's identity as a disciple of the 7 great sects, Chu Fengmian, he didn't care. Chu Fengmian, immortal realm, Chu Fengmian, immortal realm, Chu Fengmian, forgive him. However, Chu Fengmian wouldn't give the disciples of the 7 great sects any chance. "Kneel." With a wave of his hand, Chu Fengmian grabbed the body of the Medicine Capital's ancestor and brought it before him. "Medicine Capital Chu Medicine Fiansley. Oh, damn it, no one has ever dared to treat me like this. Never." The Medicine Capital Patriarch was furious when he heard Chu Fengmian's words. Making an old ancestor kneel was more humiliating than killing him. He had never knelt even in the face of a powerful old ancestor. It was impossible for him to kneel before Chu Fengmian now. "Brat, don't go too far. Do you really think I don't have any other means? Even if I don't fight for the jade dew sacred fruit, I will kill you today." The Medicine Capital Patriarch roared furiously. As he roared, waves of medicinal power appeared. These medicinal powers seemed to have been accumulating within the Medicine Capital Patriarch's body all this time. Now, as he opened it, the medicinal power was completely integrated into the Medicine Capital ancestor's body. This caused the aura of the Medicine Capital's ancestor to suddenly rise. The spirit force that he had used up was also instantly recovered. Any patriarch had a trump card in a life and death struggle, and the Medicine Capital Patriarch was no exception. It was just that they generally wouldn't use it unless they were forced into a desperate situation. The Medicine Capital Patriarch originally didn't want to use it. Even if he lost to Chu Fengmian and felt extremely humiliated, it didn't force him into a desperate situation. But now, Chu Fengmian made the Medicine Capital Patriarch kneel. This was completely different. This was no longer an insult, but a humiliation. As long as a warrior had dignity, they wouldn't allow themselves to abandon their dignity and kneel. This brat has gone too far. He has forced the Medicine Capital Patriarch to use his trump card. His strength is not bad, but he doesn't know when to stop. When the onlookers saw this scene, they couldn't help but shake their heads as they looked at Chu Fengmian. Doing things this way was indeed a bit too much. No matter what, the medicine capital patriarch was still an patriarch. He must have his own trump card. Among the patriarchs there was rarely a life and death struggle because both sides would restrain themselves and not force the other to the extreme. Otherwise, a life and death struggle wouldn't be beneficial to anyone. Unless it was a life and death grudge, no one would do such a thing. In their view, the grudge between Chu Fengmian and the medicine capital patriarch wasn't worth it for both sides to suffer. Since Chu Fengmian had already taken the limelight, it was best for him to withdraw. Now that things had reached this point, there was no way to end it. However, the onlookers also had a gloating attitude. Chu Fengmian's strength was strong, so he was naturally their opponent when competing for the Jade Dew sacred fruit. If Chu Fengmian and the medicine capital patriarch really suffered, it would be the best outcome for them. Medicine God's power, reverse the universe. The moment the medicine capital patriarch's body completely recovered, a burst of spiritual power suddenly erupted from his body. This burst of spiritual power directly broke the pressure that shrouded Chu Fengmian and turned into a huge millstone that bombarded Chu Fengmian. The moment the millstone was blasted out, heaven and earth shook. It was a shocking move that the medicine capital patriarch had used up all his spiritual power. This move had a significant impact on the medicine capital patriarch's strength, so he wouldn't use it unless he was in a life and death situation. Using this move now represented the medicine capital patriarch's madness. Boom, boom, boom. The huge millstone had already shattered the layers of spiritual power around Chu Fengmian, and its power was getting stronger and stronger. If he could take advantage of this move to completely kill Chu Fengmian. Chapter 872. You still want to struggle? Don't you understand that all your struggles are meaningless in my eyes? Chu Fengmian sneered as he looked at the ancestor of medicine capital, who was still making his last stand. He didn't even use 1/10 of his strength to deal with the ancestor of medicine capital. Now, he was giving the ancestor of medicine capital the illusion of a life and death struggle. Suppress. Chu Fengmian only spat out a single word, but his aura rose steadily. Chu Fengmian suddenly threw a punch at the incomparably huge millstone. Waves of spiritual energy collided, and the millstone was suddenly shattered into pieces. The shattering of the millstone simply shattered all of medicine capital's ancestors' hopes. The ancestor of medicine capital had used his strongest technique, condensing all the spiritual energy in his body to create this huge millstone. But now, the millstone was mercilessly shattered by Chu Fengmian. Since you don't want to kneel, then I'll trample you under my feet. Chu Fengmian sneered and suddenly stomped his foot. The ancestor's face was directly stepped on by Chu Fengmian. The ancestor's head was directly crushed, and the scene was incomparably miserable. With the ancestor of medicine capital's vitality, he didn't die from this stomp and directly recovered. However, his face was still under Chu Fengmian's foot. He crazily condensed all his power, trying to escape from Chu Fengmian's foot. But in front of Chu Fengmian's power, the ancestor of medicine capital didn't even have the qualifications to escape. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Chu Fengmian easily stepped on him. An ancestor without any dignity could only be trampled under Chu Fengmian's foot, unable to break free. The ancestor of medicine capital lost. He actually lost so miserably. The ancestor of medicine capital even used his last trump card, but he still lost so miserably. The people in the crowd who were gloating over the ancestor's misfortune reduced a lot. They all felt a chill in their hearts when they saw the ancestor of medicine capital's current state. No matter what, the medicine capital old ancestor was still an old ancestor, especially since he was originally a genius of the 7 major sections. Although he couldn't be compared to the top geniuses, he was still an old ancestor. Although he wasn't among the top geniuses, he was still a famous genius with a high status in the 9 regions. But now, the ancestor of medicine capital was being trampled under Chu Fengmian's foot. His face was deformed, crushed, and condensed again and again. The only thing that didn't change was the endless humiliation. An ancestor's humiliation was 100 times, no, 1,000 times more than killing him. Chu Fengmian eye for an eye. The medicine capital's ancestor had just declared that he wanted to trample Chu Fengmian underfoot and humiliate him. Chu Fengmian was to let the ancestor of medicine. Bastard! Bastard! I'll kill you! Kill you! The ancestor of medicine capital was being trampled under Chu Fengmian's foot in front of everyone. The ancestor of medicine capital's expression was extremely ferocious. He urged his spiritual power again and again, trying to break free and resist Chu Fengmian. But before his spiritual power could be fully condensed, Chu Fengmian's foot mercilessly stepped on his head again and again. A crushed skull could be regrown, but the pain was unavoidable. Above the canopy, everyone could hear the ancestor of medicine capital's heart-wrenching screams. Even though he was an ancestor, he couldn't bear such terrible pain. Kid, let him go quickly. Little bastard, do you really want to fall out with the 7 great sects? Let him go quickly. The people of the 7 great sects won't let you go. You'll be wanted soon, and there will be no place for you in the 9 regions. The Medicine King Valley disciples couldn't bear it anymore and shouted at Chu Fengmian angrily. Little bastard? Chu Fengmian's eyes revealed a fierce glint. He suddenly waved his hand and condensed an incomparably huge palm, which directly enveloped them. The few Medicine King Valley disciples who were hooting were immediately locked on by Chu Fengmian, and Chu Fengmian's palm grabbed them. The few disciples of the Valley of the Medicine Masters who were cursing had no chance of resisting. They were caught in the palm of Chu Fengmian's hand. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Chu Fengmian's palm crushed them. Then, a vortex condensed and swallowed all the essence blood of the Medicine King Valley disciples, leaving not a single drop behind. For the life and death realm warriors and even the ancestor, as long as a drop of their essence blood was left, there was a chance for them to be reborn. But this time, Chu Fengmian didn't give them any chance of rebirth at all and directly swallowed all the essence blood. Cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. In an instant, several more Medicine King Valley disciples died at the hands of Chu Fengmian. The disciples of the 7 major sects were respected by almost everyone outside, but in the eyes of Chu Fengmian, they were like ants. He killed when he wanted to, without a care. What you are doing is a little too much. This is the Divine Tree Secret Realm, the territory of the 7 major sections. If you know what's good for you, quickly release the Medicine Capital ancestor. Seeing that Chu Fengmian had already begun his massacre, the desolate ancient sect's ancestor, Barren Cloud Ancestor, suddenly spoke up. Although the 7 major sects had their own internal conflicts, they had always been bound together for good or ill. Those ordinary Medicine King Valley disciples and life and death realm warriors dying at the hands of Chu Fengmian was one thing. But the Medicine Capital ancestor couldn't die. That's right. If you don't want to go against the 7 major sects, you should know what's good for you and be a smart person. The Tianjian sect's ancestor also spoke up coldly. Sir, it's impossible for you to fight against so many of us by yourself. Release the Medicine Capital ancestor and apologize. Release him at once. That's right, this is the Divine Tree Secret Realm. It's not a place where you can act so presumptuously. This child is extremely vicious. It seems very likely that he's from the 6 Paths Demon Gate. Let's suppress this child first. Another ancestor spoke up. This ancestor wasn't a disciple of the 7 major sects, but a disciple of the Black Heaven sect in the southern region. He also commanded a portion of the southern region warriors and belonged to one of the factions. Suppress this child first and save the Medicine Capital ancestor. The Barren Cloud ancestor spoke abruptly. He had already gathered his spiritual power, and an ancient path suddenly condensed under his feet. Chapter 873. The Desolation Great Path. The supreme secret technique of the desolate ancient sect. The moment Ancestor Baron Cloud stepped onto the Desolation Great Path, he was completely separated from Chu Fengmian. It was as if he had entered a different space. His Desolation Great Path extended to Chu Fengmian's side and pulled Ancestor Yao Jing's body into it. Everyone, attack and suppress this kid. Seeing Ancestor Yao Jing being pulled into the Desolation Great Path, Ancestor Baron Cloud's face relaxed. Once he stepped into the Desolation Great Path, nothing outside could affect him. He was practically invincible. Once Ancestor Yao Jing stepped into the Desolation Great Path, Chu Fengmian would not be able to attack him. The Desolation Great Path? No one has ever been able to save someone from my hands. Battle Dragon Falling Star. Chu Fengmian let out a loud roar and surrounded him in layers. Chu Fengmian's body was transformed into the appearance of the ancient war dragon. The ancient battle dragon that he turned into was extremely ferocious. It was like an ancient ferocious beast had descended. Countless warriors were terrified when they saw the battle dragon. Break! A dragon's roar resounded in front of the Desolation Great Path. This roar was enough to cause countless cracks to appear on the Desolation Great Path. It was just a dragon's roar. The secret technique of the desolate ancient sect, the Desolation Great Path, cracked just like that. What kind of martial technique is this? A Dragon Clan martial technique? No, I've seen countless Dragon Clan martial techniques, but I've never seen such a terrifying Dragon Clan martial technique. Ancestor Baron Cloud shouted in disbelief. With his knowledge, he had seen countless Dragon Clan martial techniques, but none of them were comparable to the one that Chu Fengmian had just displayed. Most of the Dragon Clan martial techniques in the 9 regions were learned from true dragons. Some of them were even learned from dragon kings and dragon emperors. There had never been a pure battle dragon martial technique that Chu Fengmian had displayed. It was the origin of all Dragon Clan martial technique. After the initial shock, Ancestor Baron Cloud's eyes turned solemn. He naturally knew how terrifying this power was. Behind him, a bronze door suddenly opened. It was the Door of Desolation, a spatial door that connected to the Desolation Great Path. An endless stream of desolation power was transmitted from the Door of Desolation, strengthening the Desolation Great Path beneath Ancestor Baron Cloud's feet. Kid, no matter how powerful your Dragon Clan martial technique is, you can't break my Desolation Great Path. The Baron Cloud Ancestor's great way of the ancients grew larger and larger. With the support of the divine power of the ancients, it grew larger and tougher. Such a vast, desolate great Tao, supported by the Door of Desolation's endless desolate god power, was almost impossible to break. It was an invincible existence. Desolation Great Path. It is indeed is technique. Secrets. Desolation Great Technique. Realm. Unless cultivation realm, a great realm. Realm great realm path. Path. It. Sect is. Senior brother Huang Yun is invincible. The disciples of the sect of the desolate ancient sect were extremely excited. They were waiting for the moment when Chu Fengmian would be suppressed. Really? Desolation Great Path? Who do you think you are? You're just an immortal realm ancestor. Even the Desolation Great Path can't protect you. Chu Fengmian suddenly sneered again and again. His sneers turned into dragon roars. Break. As the dragon roars rang out, the primordial war dragon that Chu Fengmian had transformed into suddenly charged towards the Baron Cloud ancestor. Boom, boom, boom. The Desolation Great Path beneath Ancestor Baron Cloud's feet rumbled under the violent impact. The Desolation Great Path was pushed back. When the last wave of power came down, the entire Desolation Great Path was filled with crack. Then, with a loud boom, it shattered. In the Desolation Path, The bodies of the Barren Cloud ancestor and the Medicine Capital ancestor were suddenly sent flying. Both of them spat out mouthfuls of blood and fell to the ground. What kind of power is this? The Desolation Great Path has been shattered. Oh my God, is he still human? Everyone looked at Chu Fengmian as if they were looking at a demon. The Desolation Great Path couldn't be shaken by warriors of the same realm, let alone break it. Everyone was stunned as they watched Ancestor Barren Cloud's Desolation Great Path being mercilessly shattered. If it was a more powerful ancestor, they wouldn't be surprised if it was the Desolation Great Path that shattered Ancestor Barren Cloud's Desolation Great Path. After all, the Desolation Great Path was only invincible in the same realm. It was normal for it to be shattered when it encountered a more powerful ancestor. But Chu Fengmian was at the peak of the life and death realm. Originally, he was 3 whole levels away from the Barren Cloud ancestor. Moreover, Ancestor Barren Cloud was a disciple of one of the 7 major sections. His strength surpassed warriors of the same realm. Under such circumstances, Chu Fengmian's gap was even greater. No one would have thought that such a day would come. Monster! Monster! Since when did such a monster appear in the 9 regions? Not good. Let's attack together and suppress this kid. Otherwise, none of us will get the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit. After recovering from their shock, the other patriarchs began to shout out loud. They were all here for the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit. The strength that Chu Fengmian displayed was simply shocking. The first thing they had to do to obtain the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit was to suppress Chu Fengmian. The warriors present had already joined forces, and countless martial skills had already bombarded towards Chu Fengmian. Layers of martial skills enveloped Chu Fengmian at the same time. There was no end to these layers of martial skills. They seemed to be endless. They wanted to crush Chu Fengmian to death and suppress him alive. Boom! Almost at the same time, an unforeseen event occurred above the tree crown. The runes on the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit that had been hanging above the tree crown suddenly condensed. The Jade Dew Sacred Fruit had ripened. Wave after wave of incomparably pure medicinal fragrance suddenly spread out. Seeing the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit ripening, Chu Fengmian finally revealed a smile. Since the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit had ripened, then there was no need to continue the stalemate. Chu Fengmian's expression became somewhat fierce. His eyes flickered with an ominous glint. Very well, it seems like I don't have time to waste with you. All of you die. Chapter 874. What a big tone! You're young, but you talk big. Kid, if you withdraw from the fight for the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit, we can still spare your life and let you leave. Otherwise, we'll join forces and suppress you. A few old ancestors looked at Chu Fengmian and threatened coldly. Is that so? You want to suppress me with just a bunch of dogs and chickens? I didn't kill you just now because I was stalling for time. Now that the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit has matured, there's no need for you to live. Chu Fengmian said proudly. As long as it was a martial artist who was his enemy, they didn't have the right to live. Arrogant. Hearing Chu Fengmian's words, those old ancestors were incomparably furious. No matter how strong Chu Fengmian was, he was still just a life and death realm martial artist. With so many old ancestors joining forces, they were actually being trampled on by a life and death realm martial artist. How could they endure this? Ancient Moon God's might. Countless disciples of the ancient Moon Canyon shouted in unison. Countless spiritual energies supported the old ancestor of the ancient Moon Canyon. Suddenly, the old ancestor of the ancient Moon Canyon waved his hand. Jiuyu's gigantic dance suddenly came crashing down on Chu Fengmian. This ancient Moon Canyon contained the spiritual energies of countless disciples of the ancient Moon Canyon. It wanted to suppress Chu Fengmian. On the side, there were also countless martial skills to restrict Chu Fengmian's movement. All the martial artists attacked together. Their goal was to thoroughly suppress Chu Fengmian. A bunch of ants. Even if you join forces, you're still just ants. Chu Fengmian's lips curled up. Facing the attacks of countless martial skills, his expression didn't change. However, a treasured carriage suddenly appeared under his seat. On this treasured carriage, 8 ancient battle dragons roared at the same time. Chu Fengmian sat on the battle dragon treasured carriage and controlled it to fly out. This ancient moon canyon was mercilessly shattered in front of the battle dragon treasured carriage. Countless martial skills bombarded the battle dragon treasured carriage. The umbrella on the battle dragon treasured carriage slowly opened. All the martial skills bombarded it, but they couldn't even cause the slightest ripple. Not to mention breaking the umbrella's defense. What a terrifying treasured carriage! This was the Heavenly Demon Treasure Carriage? 9 Demons Cities Heavenly Demon Treasure Carriage? One of the patriarchs immediately recognized the origin of the chariot. Only the 9 Demons Cities Battle Dragon Chariot was capable of such a feat. Didn't Chu Fengmian obtain the Heavenly Demon Treasured Carriage? Are you Chu Fengmian? The news that Chu Fengmian had obtained the Heavenly Demonic Treasure Carriage had already spread throughout the entire central region. It could be said that the Battle Dragon Treasured Carriage had become the symbol of Chu Fengmian's identity. As long as the Battle Dragon Treasured Carriage appeared, it represented Chu Fengmian's arrival. Chu Fengmian! It's Chu Fengmian! Upon hearing this name, the gazes of the other patriarchs changed. A peerless, ferocious man. The lunatic who killed the disciples of the 7 great sections. Quickly inform the patriarch. Chu Fengmian is here. Some of the desolate ancient sect's disciples were already shouting loudly. This was the divine tree mystic realm, the core of the desolate ancient sect. These martial artists had never doubted Chu Fengmian's identity. They thought that even the lunatic Chu Fengmian would not dare to step into the divine tree mystic realm. Under the premise of offending the 7 great sects, entering the divine tree mystic realm was like sending a lamb to the tiger's den. However, they did not expect Chu Fengmian to be such a lunatic. He dared to enter the divine tree mystic realm alone. You know who I am now? But it doesn't matter. You're all going to die soon anyway. Chu Fengmian's lips curled into a cold smile. Since he was going to kill these people, he had no intention of hiding his strength. Chu Fengmian, I didn't expect you to be so arrogant. You still dare to enter the divine tree mystic realm. The Barren Cloud Patriarch, who had been sent flying by Chu Fengmian, struggled to get up and looked at Chu Fengmian coldly. Soon, the experts of the desolate ancient sect will know about this. In the divine tree mystic realm, you won't be able to escape even if you have wings. Is that so? Then let's see if the experts of the desolate ancient sect are faster, or if my sword is faster. Chu Fengmian sneered disdainfully. A sharp blade suddenly appeared in his hand. Then, the ancestral Dragon Supreme sword suddenly condensed in Chu Fengmian's hand. The moment Chu Fengmian held the ancestral Dragon Supreme sword, his aura was completely different from before. Chu Fengmian's strongest point was still his sword Dao. A sword cultivator's true form was only when he held a sword in his hand. Chu Fengmian suddenly unsheathed his sword. The sharp blade suddenly split into thousands of rays and slashed at all the warriors present. Oh no! Block it quickly! That's the ancestral Dragon Supreme sword. These warriors had heard of the ancestral Dragon Supreme sword's reputation. When they saw Chu Fengmian unsheathing his sword, they hurriedly gathered their spiritual energy to block it. Layers of spiritual energy condensed in front of the countless martialists to form a huge barrier in an attempt to block the sword. Ridiculous! Chu Fengmian's face was filled with disdain. How could these people possibly be able to withstand his sword light? Crack! The sword light slashed onto the spiritual energy barrier. In an instant, the barrier was shattered into pieces. The countless warriors behind the barrier were all annihilated by the sword. Every warrior's body was destroyed by the sword ray and turned into a cloud of blood mist. There was no possibility of rebirth. Except for a few patriarchs, almost all the other warriors were killed by the sword ray. How could this be? What kind of swordsmanship is this? How could there be such a terrifying swordsmanship? The Tianjian sect's patriarch shouted in disbelief. The Tianjian sect was known as the pinnacle of swordsmanship in the 9 regions. The Tianjian sect was the most respected swordsmanship in the 9 regions. However, Chu Fengmian's sword ray was beyond his imagination. Even the countless swordsmanship recorded in the Tianjian sect could not be compared to Chu Fengmian's. The 9 regions swordsmanship created by Chu Fengmian did not belong to the 9 regions. It had surpassed countless swordsmanship in the 9 regions and reached a new level. Even the countless swordsmanship recorded in the Tianjian sect could not be compared to Chu Fengmian's. However, the countless swordsmanship recorded in the Tianjian sect was useful to Chu Fengmian. If he wanted to perfect the 9 regions swordsmanship, he had to obtain all the swordsmanship recorded in the 9 regions. Sooner or later, Chu Fengmian would obtain the swordsmanship recorded in the Tianjian sect. Chapter 875. Damn it! Barren Cloud, when are the experts from the desolate ancient sect going to arrive? Some of the old ancestors were in a frenzy. Under Chu Fengmian's sword, all of the life and death realm martial artists were killed except for the old ancestors. Even the few of them had exhausted all of their spiritual power and barely survived. They didn't even have the strength to resist. These old ancestors couldn't imagine how a life and death realm martial artist could force them to this point. Chu Fengmian was rumored to be barely able to fight with the old ancestors. How could he be so strong? Soon, I've already sent a message. Although there aren't any old ancestors in the Divine Tree Secret Realm, it won't take long for them to arrive. The Barren Cloud old ancestor said anxiously. Wait for the experts from the desolate ancient sect to arrive? Do you think I'll give you the chance? All of you die. Chu Fengmian snorted and attacked. He wouldn't give the Barren Cloud old ancestor a chance to buy time. This time, Chu Fengmian's appearance in the Divine Tree Secret Realm might attract some terrifying experts from the desolate ancient sect. It might even attract some sovereigns of the Heavenly Mandate Realm. After all, Chu Fengmian's appearance in the Divine Tree Secret Realm was the best opportunity for Chu Fengmian. The desolate ancient sect wouldn't let go of this opportunity. The best plan was to kill these people, take the Jiuyu sacred fruit, and leave. Sky-piercing sword shadow. Chu Fengmian swung his sword again, creating a sky full of sword shadows. No, Chu Fengmian, you can't kill me. I'm from the Black Heaven sect, not one of the 7 major sections. If you kill me, the Black Heaven sect will hunt you down. The Black Heaven sect old ancestor looked at Chu Fengmian with fear and shouted. As long as you don't kill me, I won't tell anyone about what happened today. I won't fight with you for the Jiuyu sacred fruit. You can't kill me. I don't even care about the people from the Black Heaven sect and the 7 major sections. The Black Heaven sect is nothing. Chu Fengmian sneered when he heard the Black Heaven sect old ancestor's threat. The number of people he killed would not change. Since these old ancestors wanted to suppress him just now, all of them deserved to die. Chu Fengmian would never do something like releasing a tiger back into the mountains. Releasing a tiger back into the mountains would cause endless trouble in the future. Die. As Chu Fengmian spoke, the sword shadows pierced through the bodies of countless patriarchs. Screams rang out one after another. Although they stopped abruptly, all the ancestors had died under Chu Fengmian's sword. After killing all the warriors, Chu Fengmian descended from the sky and landed on the crown of the tree. He walked in front of the Jiuyu sacred fruit. The Jiuyu sacred fruit had a strange purple color when it was ripe. Chu Fengmian could smell the fragrance of herbs as he approached it. Just this medicinal fragrance alone was enough to help some weaker warriors increase their chances of breaking through. I've finally obtained the Jiuyu life-breaking pill's last sacred medicine, the Jiuyu holy fruit. Chu Fengmian was overjoyed as he gathered his spiritual power. A giant hand made of spiritual energy grabbed at the Jiuyu sacred fruit. As long as the Jiuyu sacred fruit wasn't in his spatial ring, Chu Fengmian couldn't let down his guard. In a breath's time, the giant hand of spiritual energy was formed and grabbed at the Jiuyu sacred fruit. The power of this grab was something that ordinary patriarchs couldn't resist. However, Chu Fengmian knew that since the Jiuyu sacred fruit grew on the divine tree wouldn't give it to him so easily. Boom! Boom! Just as the giant hand of spiritual energy was about to touch the Jiuyu sacred fruit, suddenly, countless rays of light appeared around the Jiuyu sacred fruit. The multicolored light had appeared without a sound. It had extended from the divine tree. Sacred medicines had some consciousness, so they naturally didn't want to be taken by a warrior. You want to fight me with a mere stalk of Saint Herb? Endless dragon aura, break for me! Chu Fengmian roared. Layers of dragon scales appeared on his body, forming a huge array. Endless dragon aura came crashing down. Under the erosion of the dragon's might, the strength of the light gradually became weaker and weaker. It had already begun to shatter. Not good. Someone is attacking the divine tree. The Jiuyu sacred fruit. Someone wants to seize the Jiuyu sacred fruit. Damn it. It's Chu Fengmian, that little bastard. An old figure suddenly appeared in the divine tree's secret realm. It was a white-haired old man who seemed to have lived for many years. However, time had only left a mark on his appearance. The spiritual energy in his body was extremely vigorous. Every step he took was enough to shatter the space. On the other side, the layer of light was finally broken under the dragon aura. After all, this was only the power of the Jiuyu sacred fruit, and not the true power of the divine tree. If it was the power of the divine tree that condensed the multicolored light, if the divine tree was condensed by the divine tree, Chu Fengmian wouldn't be able to break it even if he used all his skills. Great, I got the Jiuyu sacred fruit. Chu Fengmian looked at the fist-sized purple fruit in his hand and hurriedly opened his empty ring and put the Jiuyu sacred fruit into it. Now, it's time to leave. A jade talisman suddenly appeared in Chu Fengmian's hand. It was the jade talisman to leave the divine tree's secret realm. Little bastard! How dare you set foot in the divine tree's secret realm? Die! Just as Chu Fengmian was about to crush the jade talisman, a thunderous roar came from the sky. A furious roar suddenly descended from the sky, followed by an enormous amount of spiritual energy. This spiritual power fell from the sky like a huge wave, sweeping toward Chu Fengmian, leaving him with nowhere to hide. They're here so quickly. Chu Fengmian's eyes flashed with coldness. He didn't expect the experts of the desolate ancient sect to move so quickly. It seemed like Chu Fengmian was a huge threat to the desolate ancient sect. Now, in less than a minute, there were already experts rushing over. 7th level of the life and death realm, destiny realm. Chu Fengmian raised his head and saw the old man's appearance. He also felt the old man's strength at a glance. It was just as Chu Fengmian had expected. A true old man of the desolate ancient sect, an emperor, had arrived. Chu Fengmian, I admit that your arrogance is beyond my imagination. I didn't expect you to come to the divine tree's secret realm alone. However, today is the day you die. You've been against the 7 major sects for so long and killed my desolate ancient sect. It's time for you to pay for it. Chapter 876. This wave of spiritual energy descended from the sky and blasted down, turning into an incomparably huge palm. This palm seemed to be at least 1,000 miles wide. The power of the palm shattered the surrounding space. It was a palm that could destroy everything. That palm strike was aimed directly at Chu Fengmian's body. This palm contained an extremely terrifying killing intent. A peerless emperor of the desolate ancient sect had made his move. He was the current ruler of the divine tree's secret realm. The ancestor emperor. This was intolerable. In the ancestor emperor's heart, his anger had reached its peak. Chu Fengmian had killed countless disciples of the desolate ancient sect and still dared to come to the divine tree's secret realm. He even wanted to snatch the dew-sacred fruit. This was intolerable. This action showed that Chu Fengmian did not put the desolate ancient sect in his eyes. He came to the divine tree secret realm alone and killed the disciples of the 7 major sections. This was a provocation to the desolate ancient sect. If this matter were to spread, the desolate ancient sect would not be able to establish itself in the 9 regions. Allowing a life and death realm warrior to roam freely in the divine tree secret realm was a humiliation to any expert of the desolate ancient sect. When the ancestor emperor heard about Chu Fengmian, he was furious. Without any hesitation, he chased after Chu Fengmian and wanted to kill him. As an emperor, the ancestor emperor had disregarded his status to deal with a life and death realm warrior. However, one could see how much hatred the ancestor emperor had for Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian's appearance was a thorn in the heart of the desolate ancient sect. As long as it was not removed, the 7 major sects would not be able to raise their heads in the 9 regions. Divine Tree Secret Realm. Seal it. Rumble. As the ancestor emperor spoke, the surrounding space was suddenly sealed. The entire divine tree secret realm was completely shut down with his words. The jade talisman in Chu Fengmian's hand lost its luster. The divine tree secret realm was sealed, making it impossible for anyone to leave. This was an indestructible seal that could seal the entire divine tree secret realm. The emperor's means are indeed extraordinary. He can even seal the divine tree secret realm. Chu Fengmian was about to secretly crush the jade talisman and leave as soon as possible. Who would have thought that the ancestor emperor would arrive so quickly? Kid, since you've fallen into my hands today, you're already dead. Give up on struggling. You won't be able to escape from the divine tree secret realm today. The ancestral emperor looked at Chu Fengmian and said coldly, "You've killed so many of our disciples from the 7 great sections. You deserve death. However, I'll give you a chance today. As long as you hand over all the treasures you've obtained, I'll give you a chance to live. What do you think?" The ancestral emperor stared at Chu Fengmian from a lofty position. His gaze was locked onto Chu Fengmian, as though he had already grasped Chu Fengmian's life and death in his hands. "Sovereign? Very good, I haven't fought against an emperor before. This is my first time fighting against an emperor." Chu Fengmian's expression didn't change at all when he saw the ancestral wild. The arrival of the ancestral wild was indeed beyond Chu Fengmian's expectations. However, since he dared to come to the divine tree secret realm, he had already guessed that there would be an emperor coming to deal with Chu Fengmian. Even if it wasn't the ancestral emperor, there would be other emperors coming. It didn't matter who came. Although Chu Fengmian had fought against a few emperors from the North Sea Academy back in the Sword Sovereign Palace, neither Chu Fengmian nor the Yi Huang had used their full strength at that time. This time, it was truly the time for Chu Fengmian to fight against an emperor. A life and death realm martialist fighting against an emperor? Throughout the history of the 9 regions, there had never been such a crazy act. However, Chu Fengmian was going to go crazy for once today. He wanted to see exactly how powerful this ruler was. Sword. The ancestral dragon supreme sword was suddenly unsheathed. Chu Fengmian held it in his hand and slashed out with a sword light. Crash. The moment the sword light slashed out, the surrounding space shattered. Sky-splitting sword. The moment the sword light slashed out, it was enough to slash open a crack in the heaven and earth. It was one of the most ferocious sword moves in the 9 regions' sword art. I'm the Sword Emperor. Sword shatters heaven and earth. Chu Fengmian no longer concealed the sword intent on his body. The strength of the sword intent was terrifying to the extreme. Facing an emperor, Chu Fengmian naturally knew that it was impossible for him to hide anything. Courting death. Seeing that Chu Fengmian still dared to attack, the ancestral emperor's face revealed a trace of anger. He was an emperor, and this Chu Fengmian, who was merely at the peak of life and death realm, dared to attack him. This was no different from an ant provoking a ferocious tiger. With a thought from the Ancestor Emperor, the Ancestor Emperor's spiritual energy poured down from his palm. The power of this palm enveloped the entire horizon as if the firmament had fallen. It collided with Chu Fengmian's power on the spot. Boom! Chu Fengmian's sword light slashed at the power of this palm and directly tore apart the spiritual energy. However, the power of this palm was so strong that it far surpassed Chu Fengmian's imagination. The power of Chu Fengmian's sword light was simply a drop of water in the ocean compared to the vast firmament. His sword was sharp, but in the next moment, it suddenly twisted. Boundless spiritual energy immediately bombarded Chu Fengmian's body. Is this the true power of an emperor? Chu Fengmian could feel that his sword was destroyed by an extremely pure and powerful power. It was a pure oppression of power. Even if Chu Fengmian's sword was sharp, it could only be forcibly crushed in front of this ruthless power. This was the power of an emperor. Even Chu Fengmian could kill a heart-refining expert who was at the 6th step of the life and death step. However, when facing an emperor, he was powerless. In this exchange, Chu Fengmian clearly understood the power of an emperor. It could be said that even 100 heart-refining old ancestors couldn't be a match for an emperor. This was a completely different realm, a chasm. Although it was only a step away, it was so close yet so far away. Without taking this step, it was impossible to contend against an emperor. Brat, do you know the strength of an emperor? No matter how profound your sword technique is, it's meaningless in front of true power. The ancestral emperor looked at Chu Fengmian and coldly said, "Since you're not willing to speak, then this old man will capture and suppress you. At that time, this old man will still know all your secrets." Chapter 877. Above the sky, an old figure suddenly descended. It was the emperor who had attacked the ancestor emperor. Although he was incomparably old, the vitality in his body was much stronger than any other youth. His spiritual energy was also extremely robust. His gaze was filled with boundless killing intent as he looked at Chu Fengmian. Just being looked at by this gaze filled with killing intent was enough to make a martial artist tremble. The surrounding spiritual energy had all submitted to this old man. This was the pressure of an emperor. Seizing the mandate of heaven, becoming an emperor. This emperor appeared in the sky and pointed at Chu Fengmian. The space around Chu Fengmian froze. Chu Fengmian was unable to take another step forward. "Kid, although I don't know what kind of grudge you have with my desolate ancient sect, a mere life and death realm martial artist actually has such strength. It seems like you've had a lot of fortuitous encounters." The Ancestor Emperor looked at Chu Fengmian and said coldly. The Ancestor Emperor spoke. Every word of his was filled with an unparalleled might. Even some life and death realm martial artists, and even some old ancestors, didn't dare to resist after hearing his word. This was the prestige of an emperor. No one dared to disobey. "I'll give you a chance. Submit to our desolate ancient sect, become our slave, and pledge your loyalty to us. If you don't submit, you'll die." The Ancestor Emperor took a step forward and arrived before Chu Fengmian. The terrifying pressure on his body was simply about to suppress Chu Fengmian. Not good. Chu Fengmian already felt that in the face of this pressure, even the spiritual energy in his body had already been firmly suppressed. Within his body, the battle dragon bloodline was roaring crazily, wanting to break out. However, in front of this absolute power, it was being suppressed. The strength of an emperor wasn't something Chu Fengmian could contend against right now. Unless Chu Fengmian took another step forward and became an old ancestor. At that time, even if he faced an emperor, he would still have the strength to fight. But how difficult would it be to break through? At this moment, it was impossible for Chu Fengmian to break through. The appearance of this emperor simply cut off all of Chu Fengmian's paths of survival, forcing him into a dead end. "It seems like you still want to resist? Is that so? Then you won't have any more chances. I'll completely suppress you." The Ancestor Emperor looked at Chu Fengmian without uttering a word. His eyes revealed some anger and he couldn't wait any longer. As he waved his hand, an endless amount of spiritual energy pressed on Chu Fengmian's body. Chu Fengmian only felt that his body was heavier than a mountain. His internal organs and his body were being squeezed crazily. Chu Fengmian had suppressed countless martial artists before, but this time, it was his turn to experience the feeling of being suppressed by someone else. Damn it! I'll never be suppressed. So what if you're an emperor? Sword's Palace, come out! Chu Fengmian madly. Following this roar, a golden light suddenly appeared on Chu Fengmian's body. The golden light immediately shrouded Chu Fengmian's body, reducing the pressure on his body by a lot. This golden light was the power of the Sword Emperor Palace. This old man wants to see which expert dares to go against my desolate ancient sect. Seeing the power that erupted from Chu Fengmian's body, the Ancestor Emperor's eyes flickered. He glanced at Chu Fengmian as if he wanted to see through Chu Fengmian. In an instant, the Ancestor Emperor's pupils contracted and he was shocked. This is Beimang Palace? Beimang Palace is actually on you? The old man of the Beimang Academy thinks so highly of you that he handed over Beimang Palace to you? The Sword's Palace, also known as the Beimang Palace, was extremely famous in the Beimang Academy. The Ancestor Emperor had been to the Beimang Academy before, so he recognized the Sword's Palace at a glance. But kid, even if the Beimang Palace comes to protect you, you'll still be suppressed by me. You're just an artifact spirit and you want to go against me? Break for me. The Ancestor Emperor coldly snorted and the anger on his face deepened. He suddenly stretched out his hand and punched towards Chu Fengmian. The power of this punch shattered the spiritual energy of the Sword's Palace around Chu Fengmian. There was even a tenth of the power that bombarded Chu Fengmian's body. Crack! Crack! Chu Fengmian's body was like a spiritual artifact as countless cracks appeared on it. His entire body was on the verge of collapse as he was sent flying 1,000 miles away. What a terrifying power! Even the Sword's Palace can't stop the Ancestor Emperor? Chu Fengmian looked at the spiritual energy on his body that was shattered by a single punch, and he felt a sense of danger in his heart. The strength of the Ancestor Emperor was simply many times stronger than the Sun Emperor, Night Emperor, and the others. His true strength was probably close to the 8th step of the life and death steps, the ultimate realm. Young master, I need spiritual stones. I need a large amount of spiritual stones to support it. Yun Jian's anxious voice rang out in Chu Fengmian's mind. Although he had been constantly devouring Chu Fengmian's spiritual stones, at this critical moment, the consumption of spiritual energy was in the hundreds of millions. In just a few breaths of time, more than half of the spiritual energy accumulated in the Sword's Palace had been consumed. All right. Chu Fengmian did not hesitate as he opened up his spatial ring. Countless spiritual energy poured into the Sword Emperor's palace as it burned continuously. Hundreds of millions of spiritual stones burned crazily in the Sword Emperor's palace. The Sword Emperor's palace appeared in the sky and wrapped Chu Fengmian's body within. Run! If he continued to be entangled with the Ancestor Emperor, only death would await him. He was afraid that after a while, it wouldn't be as simple as the Ancestor Emperor. The emperors of the desolate ancient sect would rush over. At that time, the Sword Emperor's palace would not be able to protect Chu Fengmian. Yes, the Sword Emperor's palace burned its spiritual energy and recovered its strength. It wrapped Chu Fengmian within and turned into a streak of light as it rapidly fled into the distance. The space of the Divine Tree Secret Realm had been completely sealed. Chu Fengmian could only escape into the Divine Tree Secret Realm. The Divine Tree Secret Realm was incomparably huge. There was also a lot of primal chaos chi hidden within. Given the size of the Divine Tree Secret Realm, it wouldn't be easy for the experts of the desolate ancient sect to find him. The streak of light of the Sword Emperor's palace was extremely fast. In an instant, it had already crossed 1,000 miles. Brat, don't even think about escaping today. However, behind Chu Fengmian, another figure appeared. A middle-aged man walked through the air. Beneath his feet was a mysterious sky shuttle. Chapter 878. The moment this middle-aged man appeared, the surrounding spiritual energy submitted to him. His aura was exactly the same as the ancestor emperor's. Another emperor! Chu Fengmian felt an incomparable sense of danger in his heart. Just the ancestor emperor alone was enough to force Chu Fengmian into a desperate situation. But now, another emperor had appeared. Emperor Su, you're here too. Seeing the middle-aged man, Chu Fengmian revealed a smile. It seems like this kid is going to die today. Let's go and capture him first. The ancestor emperor and Emperor Su both activated their escape lights and chased after Chu Fengmian. Today, the desolate ancient sect was determined to kill Chu Fengmian. They had no intention of letting Chu Fengmian off. To deal with Chu Fengmian, they actually sent out 2 emperors to deal with him. One must know that emperors were extremely rare in the desolate ancient sect, excluding those old fogies who cultivated in seclusion and didn't listen to orders. In the entire desolate ancient sect, there were less than 10 emperors who could command them. Now, they had sent out 2 of them to kill Chu Fengmian. There was probably no one in the 9 regions who could receive the same treatment as Chu Fengmian. Damn it! These people from the desolate ancient sect actually want to kill me so badly? Could it be that they know of my secret? Chu Fengmian's eyes flashed with a hint of gloominess. Originally, Chu Fengmian thought that the desolate ancient sect would divert their attention with the appearance of the 6th demon gate. But now, it seemed like the desolate ancient sect's desire to kill Chu Fengmian was even greater than before. The 2 emperors activated their escape lights and chased after Chu Fengmian. The sky shuttle under Emperor Su's feet was extremely fast. Compared to the speed of the Sword Sovereign Palace, it was even faster. Almost instantly, it caught up to the Sword Sovereign Palace and was only a step away from Chu Fengmian. It's the Beimang Palace? Where did this kid come from? The Beimang Academy actually took out the Beimang Palace? When Emperor Su saw Chu Fengmian in the Sword Sovereign Palace, his face was as shocked as the ancestor emperor's. An existence like the Beimang Palace represented the foundation of a sect. It was the sacred ground of a sect. Since when did a holy land take out something like this and hand it over to a life-and-death realm martial artist? Emperor Su, there's no need to worry so much. This kid has countless fortuitous encounters. Once we suppress him, we'll naturally know his identity. The ancestral emperor shouted loudly while controlling his flying light. Good. Let's suppress him first. Emperor Su didn't want to ask any more questions. He condensed his spirit energy and instantly sealed the Sword Emperor Peak. The surrounding space became extremely hard and turned into a cage, trapping the Sword Emperor Palace inside. Brat, come out of Northern Mang Palace. It's meaningless for you to resist. Emperor Su trapped Chu Fengmian and shouted from outside. The faster you resist, the faster you will die. Damn it. Standing in the Sword Emperor Palace, Chu Fengmian could sense that the space around the Sword Emperor Palace had been completely sealed. Under such a blockade, even the Sword Emperor Hall was unable to break out of the encirclement. Yunjian, can you break out? Chu Fengmian said anxiously. Right now, there were already 2 emperors chasing after Chu Fengmian. If this dragged on, wouldn't there be a 3rd emperor? A 4th emperor? Right now, it was impossible for these 2 to break out of the Sword Emperor Palace, but if there were more and more experts in the end, the Sword Emperor Palace wouldn't be able to protect Chu Fengmian. No, young master. With my remaining strength, I can only contend against 1 emperor. With the 2 of them joining hands, it's impossible for us to escape. Yunjian also appeared from the Sword Emperor Palace with an anxious expression. No matter how strong the Sword Emperor Palace was, it was still a spirit tool. Its strength was closely related to its user. If Chu Fengmian reached a level that transcended life and death, he naturally wouldn't be afraid of emperors. However, it was far from enough to contend against two emperors with just the Sword Emperor Palace's strength. If I can break the seal of the Divine Tree Secret Realm, I can use the Cloud Feather Palace to return to Sinkhole Sky. However, the Divine Tree Secret Realm has been sealed. Even the Cloud Feather Palace can't communicate with it. Chu Fengmian inwardly calculated. He had just tried to use the Cloud Feather Palace to escape. However, the Ancestor Emperor was one step ahead and sealed the entire Divine Tree Secret Realm. Chu Fengmian's spiritual energy couldn't be transmitted out, so he couldn't communicate with the Cloud Feather Palace. No, I can't sit here and wait for death. I have to escape to a place first. Only death awaited him if he sat here and waited for death. Chu Fengmian was well aware of this point. Yunjian, if the surrounding spiritual energy is broken, how far can we escape in an instant? Chu Fengmian thought for a moment and asked. In an instant, at most a few thousand miles. Then, Emperor Su will still catch up. Yunjian thought for a moment and said. Emperor Su's speed was too fast. The sky shuttle under his feet was also a famous spirit tool. Emperor Su's name was Su, which represented his speed. Among the countless rulers, they were outstanding. It was almost impossible to escape from his pursuit. A few thousand miles should be enough. Chu Fengmian's eyes flickered. He had already formulated a plan in his heart. I'll break the surrounding spiritual energy in a moment and you'll bring me back to the Divine Tree. Back to the Divine Tree? Yunjian asked in confusion. The Divine Tree was the center of the entire Divine Tree Secret Realm. If they wanted to escape, they had to escape to other places. Going to the Divine Tree was no different than walking into a trap. That's right. Only by going to the Divine Tree will we have a chance of survival. Chu Fengmian nodded. Chu Fengmian had already sensed that the various abnormalities in the Divine Tree Secret Realm were related to the Divine Tree. Even if they escaped in other directions, Emperor Su would catch up with them. It was better to return to the Divine Tree. Perhaps Chu Fengmian could figure out the reason for the abnormalities in the Divine Tree and fight for a chance of survival. The more dangerous it was, the calmer Chu Fengmian was. He had already formulated a plan. All right. Yunjian nodded after hearing Chu Fengmian's plan. Chu Fengmian was now the owner of the Sword Emperor Palace. Thus, Yunjian immediately knew what Chu Fengmian was thinking. Although Chu Fengmian's plan was risky, there was still a chance of survival. For the current Chu Fengmian, as long as there was a chance of survival, he had to fight for it. Chapter 879. That kid is hiding in the North Mang Palace. Outside the Sword Emperor Palace, Emperor Su and Ancestor Emperor were discussing as they looked at the palace. The two of them had already sealed the space around the Sword Emperor Palace. The Sword Emperor Palace couldn't move at all. If Chu Fengmian came out, the two of them had absolute confidence that they could suppress him in a single move. Hiding in a tortoise shell like the North Mang Palace, what can we do to him? Emperor Su looked at the Sword Emperor Palace helplessly. As emperors, they were actually helpless against a puny life and death realm martial artist. This made Emperor Su's face turn somewhat ugly. When did two rulers make a move? How could they be forced to this extent? It's fine. Let him hide in this tortoise shell. This old man has already sent a message to the sect. It won't be long before someone comes to deal with him. Ancestor Emperor's gaze was ice-cold as he slowly said. If possible, it's best to capture this kid alive. This kid has too many secrets. Moreover, he's been targeting our 7 great sects for a long time. There's a high chance that he's hiding something. The heavenly demon treasured carriage, the ancestral dragon supreme sword, his sword array, and now the North Mang Palace. Emperor Su listed Chu Fengmian's fortuitous encounters and said with a jealous expression, "Where did a mere life and death kid get so many fortuitous encounters? Many famous spiritual tools of the 9 regions have fallen into his hands. It's fine. It won't be long. Once Emperor Hua and the others arrive, we'll be able to break this tortoise shell. Ancestor Emperor coldly said. Is that so? Unfortunately, you won't be able to wait until then. A mocking voice suddenly rang out. A figure suddenly appeared from the Sword Emperor Palace. This figure was Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian, you still dare to come out? Seems like we don't need to wait for Emperor Hua and the others to arrive. The two of us can suppress you. Kid die. Ancestor Emperor and Emperor Su, these two emperors, immediately attacked when they saw Chu Fengmian. Countless suppression arts bombarded Chu Fengmian. The two of them had already accumulated their spiritual power outside the Sword Emperor Palace. They were waiting for Chu Fengmian to appear so that they could suppress him directly. The ancient human emperor enlightened all living beings. Chu Fengmian appeared from the Sword Emperor Palace, holding a broken jar in his hand. In an instant, following Chu Fengmian's angry roar, waves of spiritual energy erupted from the broken jar. This wave of spiritual energy was much more difficult to see through than any spiritual artifact. A wave of incomparable power rushed out. The power that sealed the surrounding space was instantly shattered. What kind of spiritual weapon is this? How can it possess such terrifying power? The Ancestor Emperor and Emperor Su exclaimed in shock. With their strength, when they looked at the broken jar and saw the power on it, they felt fear from the bottom of their hearts. It was as if he would die on the spot if he was hit by the power of the broken jar. An extreme immortal weapon. This is a legendary extreme Dao immortal weapon. The Ancestral Emperor was the first to react. Even the most powerful heaven-grade spiritual tool could not make a ruler feel so fearful. It was no longer a heaven-grade spiritual weapon that could do this, but a legendary extreme Dao immortal weapon. Only an extreme Dao immortal weapon that surpassed a heaven-grade spiritual weapon could make them feel so terrified. Although the Emperor jar in Chu Fengmian's hand only contained 4 fragments, it could not unleash the power of true knowledge. But it was enough to deal with a few emperors. Boom! The power of the Emperor jar was condensed to the extreme in an instant, and it suddenly blasted out. The moment the power blasted out, Chu Fengmian's body began to shatter. With his current strength, he could not even control the power of the Emperor jar. His body began to shatter. This was the terror of an extreme Dao immortal weapon. Even if it was a broken extreme Dao immortal weapon, the power of the Emperor jar was not something an ordinary warrior could use. Even Chu Fengmian had to rest for a while after using it. Otherwise, it would be enough to injure his body. Chu Fengmian did not intend to use the Emperor jar unless it was a last resort. But since it was Chu Fengmian had used all his trump cards to deal with the two emperors. There was no other way. Break! Chu Fengmian roared. The power of the Emperor jar was fully displayed, and it blasted out crazily. Oh no! Retreat! The two sovereigns were horrified to the extreme. They hurriedly retreated, but how could their speed compare to that of the Emperor's jar? Their bodies were instantly swallowed up by the power of the Emperor jar. Countless explosions rang out in the air. The spiritual energy around Chu Fengmian was also shattered by the attack of the Emperor jar. Now is the time. Chu Fengmian leaped into the Sword Emperor Palace. The Sword Emperor Palace turned into a streak of light and flew towards the divine tree. Damn it! This kid is trying to escape. Amidst the countless explosions, 2 figures suddenly flew out. They were the Ancestor Emperor and Emperor Su. They were worthy of being peerless emperors. Under the power of the Emperor jar, they flew out directly. But now they no longer had the majesty of the emperors. They were battered and exhausted. At least, they were seriously injured. Even with their strength, they could not recover quickly. Chase after them. Don't let that kid escape. The 2 streams of light instantly chased after them. In the Sword Emperor Palace, Chu Fengmian also noticed the changes behind. Sovereign Su and the Ancestor Emperor had already caught up to him. Emperors are really difficult to deal with. The power of the Emperor Jar is not enough to kill them. Chu Fengmian sighed inwardly. He had activated the power of the Emperor Jar, but only seriously injured the two. If Chu Fengmian could step into the life-shattering realm, he was confident that he could kill the two of them. It seemed that the breakthrough had to be fast. But before that, Chu Fengmian had to complete his plan. Suddenly, a drop of essence blood flew out from Chu Fengmian's fingertip. The moment this drop of blood essence flew out, a surge of spiritual energy suddenly appeared from the divine tree. Like a greedy snake, it swallowed the blood essence in one gulp. Chapter 880. Sure enough, it's the divine tree that's constantly devouring spiritual energy. At a glance, Chu Fengmian saw that the greedy snake was actually a tree root. It was the root of the divine tree. After devouring the drop of essence blood, it hurriedly returned to the divine tree. I want to see what secrets are hidden in the divine tree. Chu Fengmian activated the Sword Emperor Palace and followed it without hesitation. This drop of essence blood had already been branded by Chu Feng. Even if it were to be devoured by the tree root, it would still be devoured. Chu Fengmian could clearly feel that the root was sending the spiritual energy of the drop of essence blood to a place. Chu Fengmian traced the path of the drop of essence blood and came to the edge of the divine tree. He saw that the drop of essence blood was devoured by the root and then drilled into the divine tree. There seemed to be another universe inside the divine tree. After the drop of essence blood entered the divine tree, it came to an extremely vast and boundless place. There's a hidden space inside the divine tree? Chu Fengmian was shocked when he sensed the direction of the drop of essence blood. Boom! Just as Chu Fengmian was hesitating, a sky shuttle suddenly appeared behind him. The two sovereigns, Emperor Su and Ancestor Emperor, had already caught up. As long as Chu Fengmian stopped, they would catch up to him in almost a second. There's no time to think. I can only go in and take a look. Chu Fengmian's face suddenly changed. He used the power of the Emperor Jar to temporarily block the two sovereigns and break their guard. However, this was only a temporary delay. The next time Chu Fengmian used the power of the Emperor Jar, the two sovereigns would not be so unprepared. If they were prepared, Chu Fengmian would not be able to deal with them even if he used the power of the Emperor Jar. There was only one chance, so Chu Fengmian could not hesitate any longer. Chu Fengmian's figure moved continuously and came to the divine tree. The divine tree emitted an extremely terrifying power. Although the divine tree had no consciousness now, it was still very powerful. However, it was impossible for anyone to break through the defense of the divine tree. The divine tree emitted a wave of spiritual energy that formed a barrier. This barrier was definitely one of the most terrifying barriers in the world. If any warrior attacked this barrier, he would be devoured by the power of the barrier. At that time, he would only die. Even the sovereigns did not dare to provoke the divine tree, let alone break the barrier of the divine tree. But this time, Chu Fengmian had a plan. He had his own way. Chu Fengmian's mind flickered, and a sharp sword intent burst out from Chu Fengmian's body. There seemed to be a layer of profound power hidden in the sharp sword intent. In Chu Fengmian's body, his natal sword origin and the power of creation suddenly condensed. A sword of creation condensed in Chu Fengmian's palm. The moment the sword of creation was formed, Chu Fengmian sensed that the divine tree instinctively felt a sense of fear. The power of creation was the most terrifying power in the world. Ordinary power could not break the divine tree's defense, but the sword Fengmian could. The sword Fengmian. The sword Fengmian. The sword Fengmian. The power surrounded Chu Fengmian. He looked like he had turned into a sword Fengmian. Break for me. Chu Fengmian sensed the divine tree's fear the moment he got close to it. He felt the sword Fengmian. The divine tree's barrier was broken. Chu Fengmian relied on the sword Fengmian and stepped into the divine tree. The divine tree's barrier was thick. However, Chu Fengmian had the help of the sword Fengmian. Even if Chu Fengmian's power was like an ant in front of the divine tree, the sword Fengmian was enough to frighten the divine tree. The divine tree did not dare to attack Chu Fengmian. No matter how strong the divine tree was, it did not have its own spirituality. Otherwise, how could the people of the desolate ancient sect control it? Even if all the experts in the desolate ancient sect were to join forces, they would still be no match for the Tree of God. Chu Fengmian passed through the barrier and gradually reached the end. His figure instantly merged with the divine tree. Looking from the outside, Chu Fengmian could no longer be seen. 3 breaths after Chu Fengmian entered the divine tree, 2 figures arrived at the place where Chu Fengmian was. They were Emperor Su and Ancestor Emperor. What's going on? Where's that kid? Why did his aura disappear all of a sudden? Ancestor Emperor's face was ugly. He was furious. The 2 of them chasing after Chu Fengmian was like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. 2 emperors dealing with a life and death realm expert. If news of this spread out, they would lose face. But even under such circumstances, Chu Fengmian still managed to escape from their hands. This time, his aura disappeared. It was as if he had really escaped. How could they tolerate this? They were furious and humiliated to the extreme. Emperor Su, who was standing beside Ancestor Emperor, looked calmer, but he was also embarrassed. He also felt that Chu Fengmian's aura disappeared around the divine tree. They did not know where he went. Don't worry. The divine tree secret realm has been sealed. That kid can't have left. He must have lured us here on purpose and used some method to hide his aura. Emperor Su said coldly. Gather the sect's disciples and turn the divine tree secret realm upside down. I don't believe that a life and death realm kid can survive under the pursuit of our desolate ancient sect. Alright, let's do that. After hearing Emperor Su's words, the Ancestor Emperor nodded his head. The 2 of them moved and disappeared from the divine tree secret realm. At the same time, Chu Fengmian had already passed through the divine tree's barrier. The moment he stepped into the divine tree, the scene around him spun. Chu Fengmian's body seemed to have been transported to another space by a force. When Chu Fengmian slowly opened his eyes, the golden color around him had changed. A towering giant tree was in front of him. The appearance of this giant tree was almost identical to the divine tree outside. But when Chu Fengmian saw this giant tree, he felt that it was the real divine tree. What was on the outside was merely his illusory image. Chapter 881. The moment Chu Fengmian broke the barrier of the divine tree, he found himself in a unique space. The divine tree in front of him was no different from the one in the divine tree secret realm. However, Chu Fengmian could tell at a glance whether it was real or fake. This was the real divine tree. The divine tree outside was just a camouflage of the desolate ancient sect. This is the inside of the divine tree? Or is this the real divine tree secret realm? Chu Fengmian looked around and couldn't help but exclaim. Who would have thought that there was another world within the divine tree of the divine tree secret realm? It should be said that no one would step into this place. The barrier around the divine tree was fatal to countless warriors. If Chu Fengmian hadn't used his blood essence to find out that there was another world in the divine tree, he wouldn't have taken the risk to enter. It seemed that there was a conspiracy in the divine tree secret realm. These are the Jade Dew sacred fruits? Chu Fengmian's eyes scanned the divine tree and suddenly, his eyes widened. At a glance, there were plenty of purple fruits on the divine tree. These purple fruits were exactly the same as the Jade Dew sacred fruits that Chu Fengmian had fought for on the tree crown. No, they were all Jade Dew sacred fruit. At a glance, there were at least 50 to 60 Jade Dew sacred fruits hanging on the divine tree. There are so many Jade Dew sacred fruits. Chu Fengmian was surprised. Although he was overjoyed, this was a great opportunity. A real treasure. Just one of these Jade Dew sacred fruits was enough to make countless warriors fight for it. Back on the tree crown, Chu Fengmian risked exposing his identity and used all his strength to get that one Jade Dew sacred fruit. But now there were 50 to 60 Jade Dew sacred fruit. If used well, it was enough to create 50 to 60 old ancestors. What did that mean? There were less than 100 old ancestors in the entire Northern Mang Academy. The jade-dew sacred fruits in front of Chu Fengmian were enough to create half of the old ancestors in the Northern Mang Academy. After 10,000 years, the Northern Mang Academy had nurtured countless geniuses in order to slowly accumulate 100 ancestors. What Chu Fengmian obtained this time was equivalent to nurturing half of the North Sea Academy's ancestor. This was simply a windfall. If this sacred tree were to appear in the outside world, the other sects of the 7 major sects, such as the Tianjian sect and the Medicine King Valley, would probably fight for it at all costs. No wonder the desolate ancient sect could rise so quickly. With the help of the divine tree, it would be difficult for them to not rise. Chu Fengmian couldn't help but sigh. As long as the divine tree bore a jade-dew sacred fruit, the desolate ancient sect would nurture an ancestor who had transcended life and death. It should be known that peak life and death realm experts weren't few in number in the 9 regions. However, there were only a handful of peak life and death realm experts who could surpass life and death. It could be said that it was less than 1 in 100. There were 50 to 60 jade-dew sacred fruits on each of the divine trees. In the tens of thousands of years after the desolate ancient sect obtained the divine tree, the number of jade-dew sacred fruits the desolate ancient sect had obtained was unimaginable. It could be said that the desolate ancient sect had grown from an unknown sect to one of the 7 major sections. It was all thanks to the divine tree's nurturing. It seems like the desolate ancient sect doesn't dare to use the jade-dew sacred fruits to nurture martial artists. I can't believe they've accumulated so many. Chu Fengmian looked at the 50 to 60 jade-dew sacred fruits on the divine tree and thought to himself, if the desolate ancient sect were to produce too many new ancestors, it would be enough to attract the attention of the 9 regions. Therefore, the desolate ancient sect had always kept a low profile. These 50 to 60 jade-dew sacred fruits grew on the divine tree and wouldn't be taken away by others. After all, the real divine tree was hidden behind the divine tree's secret realm's barrier. Even emperors couldn't enter, so it was naturally very safe. But this time, it was an anomaly. Chu Fengmian actually discovered the secret of the divine tree secret realm and entered. This was no different from a tiger entering a flock of sheep. Chu Fengmian and the desolate ancient sect were mortal enemies. Since he had entered today, he naturally couldn't return empty-handed. Taking away all the jade-dew sacred fruits was equivalent to the desolate ancient sect having 50 to 60 fewer ancestors who had transcended life and death. This was enough to make the desolate ancient sect's heart ache for a while. Take them all for me. Chu Fengmian suddenly burst out with spiritual energy. Around him, waves of spiritual energy transformed into several sky-devouring divine pythons. They charged directly towards the divine tree. The jade-dew sacred fruits on the divine tree sensed the danger and tried to use their spiritual energy to resist Chu Fengmian. But Chu Fengmian was already prepared. The moment the spiritual energy burst out, it was completely suppressed by Chu Fengmian's dragon power. These jade-dew sacred fruits were directly devoured by the sky-devouring divine pythons, and all of them fell into Chu Fengmian's spatial ring. In less than 5 minutes, all the jade-dew sacred fruits on the divine tree were taken by Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian wouldn't leave a single one to the desolate ancient sect. A total of 68 fruits. Chu Fengmian looked at the jade-dew sacred fruits in his spatial ring and was overjoyed. Good. So many jade-dew sacred fruits. I don't believe I can't break through this time. He didn't have 100% confidence that he could break through after refining the jade-dew life-breaker pill. But this time, with these jade-dew sacred fruits, it was different. If a life and death realm martial artist, no, even a peak life and death realm pig ate so many jade-dew sacred fruits, it would be enough to push him to the life-shattering realm. It should be known that for an ordinary peak life and death realm martial artist, A single jade sacred fruit was enough for a perfect breakthrough. Even some of the monstrous geniuses could only obtain 2 at most. 3 was the limit. Now, Chu Fengmian had 68 fruit. Adding on the materials he had prepared, it was enough to refine the Jade Life Breaker pill. With such confidence, Chu Fengmian had full confidence that he could break through. No, this divine tree isn't devouring spiritual energy to nurture the Jade sacred fruits. Suddenly, Chu Fengmian felt that the drop of essence blood he deliberately released wasn't fused with the divine tree. Instead, it went to another place. Chu Fengmian could faintly feel that all the spiritual energy the divine tree devoured in the divine tree's secret realm had gone to another place. Chapter 882. If the divine tree was devouring spiritual energy wantonly in order to condense the Jade sacred fruit, it should have devoured all of the spiritual energy into its body. However, Chu Fengmian noticed that the spiritual energy the divine tree devoured was sent to another place, in a valley less than 3 miles away from the divine tree. Let's go and take a look. Chu Fengmian's eyes flickered. With a slight movement, he flew towards the divine tree. Chu Fengmian came to investigate the divine tree's secret because he wanted to see where the spiritual energy the divine tree devoured went. These Jade sacred fruits were obtained by accident. Since he was already here, he might as well investigate thoroughly. Chu Fengmian's figure flickered as he arrived at the valley. This is a divine tree? Chu Fengmian glanced over and saw a hidden tree in the depths of the valley. This tree looked almost exactly the same as the sacred tree outside. However, it was much smaller than the sacred tree. It was only about the height of a person. Compared to the heavenly tree outside, it was tens of thousands of times smaller. It looked like a young sapling. This is a divine tree? A newly grown divine tree? Chu Fengmian sensed the spiritual energy emitted by the tree. Although it was weak, it was exactly the same as the divine tree. The divine tree is absorbing spiritual energy so crazily to nurture this newly grown divine tree? Chu Fengmian was shocked. He didn't expect it to be like this. Almost all the spiritual energy the divine tree devoured was sent to this small divine tree. After the shock, Chu Fengmian's heart began to beat wildly. What was an opportunity? What was a treasure? This was a real treasure. A new divine tree. Compared to the Jade sacred fruits Chu Fengmian had obtained before, this new divine tree was the real treasure. Even if there were 100 or 1,000 Jade sacred fruits, they would not be able to compare to this young divine tree. Chu Fengmian had witnessed the divine tree's power. Even 100 sovereigns couldn't be compared to a real divine tree. Although the effective divine tree in front of him was only a sapling, it would eventually grow up one day. When it grew to the same level as the divine tree in front of him, anyone who wanted to control this power would be almost invincible. The desolate ancient sect had grown to become one of the top 7 sects in the 9 domains just by relying on the sacred fruit that grew on the divine tree. As for the power of the divine tree itself, the desolate ancient sect was still far from being able to use it. If the barren ancient sect could control the full power of the Tree of God, they would surpass the other 6 sects and dominate the 9 regions. The huge sacred tree had matured completely. The power it contained was something that no honorable martial artist could subdue. This was also the reason why the desolate ancient sect was unable to subdue the divine tree even after such a long time. That was because the incomparably huge divine tree had already reached a level where no one could subdue it. Thus, no matter how powerful he was unable to use it. However, the young divine tree in front of him was different. Chu Fengmian felt that the effective divine tree was like a newborn. It was still very young and weak. If Chu Fengmian could subdue the divine tree and make it recognize him as its master, he would be able to nurture it thoroughly in the future. It wouldn't be a problem for him to become the emperor of the 9 domains. I must get this young divine tree. Chu Fengmian was determined to get the divine tree. He had to get this divine tree. Once he got the divine tree, the benefits it would bring to Chu Fengmian in the future would be endless. Once he got the divine tree, he would have no opponents in the future. Regardless of the 9 domains genius battle, Chu Fengmian could easily take first place. This divine tree doesn't seem to be hostile towards me. Chu Fengmian walked to the side of the divine tree and realized that it wasn't hostile towards him. This surprised Chu Fengmian a little, and he suddenly understood in his mind. Chu Fengmian's body had once refined the builder tree branch. The power of the builder tree branch had already integrated into Chu Fengmian's body. Therefore, to the divine tree, Chu Fengmian was like its own kind, which was why it wouldn't be hostile towards him. This was the best news for Chu Fengmian. No matter how weak the young divine tree in front of him was, it was still a divine tree. It was the same kind as the colossal creature outside. If Chu Fengmian was the slightest bit careless, he might be attacked by it. At that time, not to mention subduing it, it wouldn't be easy for him to escape unscathed. At the very least, Chu Fengmian felt that the power of the divine tree in front of him was not inferior to that of a ruler of the heavenly mandate realm. Suppress. Chu Fengmian observed for a moment and suddenly condensed his spiritual power. Endless dragons might envelop him. All of it enveloped the divine tree. If he wanted to get the divine tree, he had to make it submit and recognize him as its master. However, just as the dragons might envelop it, the divine tree suddenly sensed danger. A green spiritual power burst out from it. The green spiritual power instantly spread out. The dragon's might on Chu Fengmian's body was directly dispersed. Even his body was sent flying dozens of meters away by the green spiritual power. Fortunately, the divine tree only had instincts, so after sensing danger, it stopped attacking. Otherwise, it would have been extremely dangerous for Chu Fengmian just now. Even so, under the bombardment of the green spiritual power just now, all the bones in Chu Fengmian's body were broken. It was only when he circulated the power of the War Dragon technique that he recovered. Chu Fengmian moved his body and approached it again. No, this divine tree's power still far surpasses mine. It's even more terrifying than an ordinary ruler. Chu Fengmian looked at the divine tree and could not help but frown. Chu Fengmian originally felt that subduing this young divine tree should not be that difficult. Now, it seemed that the divine tree's power was still far beyond his imagination. After all, the divine tree was once a part of the builder tree. Now that it was independent, it also had the power to suppress the ancient times. It was easier said than done to subdue it with manpower. Nevertheless, Chu Fengmian would never agree to let him return empty-handed. Subduing a young divine tree was an opportunity that could last for 1,000 or 10,000 years. Even if Chu Fengmian was reborn 10,000 times, he would not encounter it again. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. In the history of the 9 regions, no one had successfully subdued a divine tree. If Chu Fengmian could do it, he would truly become the #1 person in the 9 regions. No, I must get this divine tree. Chapter 883. How was it possible for the divine tree to leave? Chu Fengmian had to get this divine tree. If he didn't, he wouldn't leave. Chu Fengmian pondered for a moment and made a decision. I'll break through inside this divine tree. He couldn't subdue this young divine tree because his realm wasn't high enough. His realm was too low, only at the peak of the life and death realm. No matter how many fortuitous encounters he had, he could only kill an old ancestor at the 6th step of the life and death steps, the heart-refining realm. However, if he met an emperor at the fate realm, Chu Fengmian wouldn't even be able to fight against the weakest emperor, let alone defeat him. Was it because Chu Fengmian didn't have enough fortuitous encounters? Chu Fengmian had more fortuitous encounters than any other so-called genius in the 9 regions. He had lived 2 lives, possessed peerless sword skills, obtained the battle dragon art, and formed the divine veins. Any genius in the 9 realms would pale in comparison to Chu Fengmian. If Chu Fengmian wanted to increase his strength, the only way was to break through. As long as he could break through and transcend the life and death steps, his strength would increase by dozens or even hundreds of times. If Chu Fengmian wanted to subdue this young divine tree, there was only one way, and that was to break through. Chu Fengmian had collected enough herbs for the Jiuyu life-breaking pill. It was time to refine the pill and break through. The divine tree secret realm is extremely safe. Those guys from the desolate ancient sect won't think that I'm here. This is the best chance to break through. Chu Fengmian thought to himself. The divine tree's secret was related to the foundation of the desolate ancient sect. Only a few people in the sect knew about it. Even Emperor Su and Ancestor Emperor's people might not know about this secret. Therefore, Chu Fengmian should be safe for a short period of time. Now that Chu Fengmian wanted to break through, this was the best place. Rumble! A ball of golden dragon flame suddenly appeared in front of Chu Fengmian. At the same time, Chu Fengmian opened his spatial ring. Countless sacred herbs were placed in front of Chu Fengmian. These were the herbs that Chu Fengmian had painstakingly collected. Chu Fengmian's hands formed countless complicated seals, condensing a huge cauldron in front of him. This cauldron had 9 dragon heads, each of which emitted scorching flames. Countless sacred herbs were thrown into the cauldron by Chu Fengmian without batting an eyelid. Immediately, all of the sacred medicines melted into waves of medicinal liquid. This medicinal liquid was the size of a washbasin. Countless golden dragon flames crazily grilled the medicinal liquid around it. Soon, the medicinal liquid began to shrink. From the size of a washbasin to the size of Aziz's. Every time, the liquid's is immortal, the sacred's T2. These were the impurities, TT-tes, STT-tes, the SBs, the immortal to TTS-TTT-tes. If these impurities weren't removed, the refined elixir would be even more terrifying than a poisonous elixir. Chu Fengmian's nerves were stretched taut as he wholeheartedly devoted himself to refining the elixir. He had to control the dragon flame at all times. Once the temperature was slightly higher or lower, it would cause the liquids to be destroyed. Chu Fengmian didn't know how much effort he had spent to collect the set of Jiuyu Life-Breaker Elixir's ingredient. There were also countless coincidences. If old Ancestor Divine Spring hadn't appeared, Chu Fengmian wouldn't have been able to obtain so many sacred herbs. Therefore, it was almost impossible to collect them again. For Chu Fengmian, this was his only chance to refine the Jiuyu Life-Breaker Elixir. If he wanted to break through to the life-shattering realm, he had to rely on the Jiuyu Life-Breaker Elixir's power. Time passed second by second. After 20 hours, Chu Fengmian sat on the same spot, wholeheartedly controlling the flame. For 20 hours, Chu Fengmian didn't move at all. He wasn't distracted at all. Even for an old ancestor, it was extremely unbearable to be so wholeheartedly immersed in the process. Fortunately, Chu Fengmian had refined many elixirs before, so he had the patience to do so. Not only were the ingredients of this saint-grade elixir hard to find, but the alchemists who could refine it were also hard to find in the entire 9 regions. Another 4 hours passed. A day passed. Chu Fengmian's body was already covered in sweat. Although he could use his spiritual energy to clean his body in an instant, he couldn't focus at all. But now, Chu Fengmian couldn't be distracted at all. He could only let the clothes stick to his body. This ball of medicinal liquid had also shrunk from the size of a washbasin to the size of a fist. It was already shrinking to its limit. From this medicinal liquid, one could already smell the medicinal fragrance within. Condense. In an instant, the medicinal liquid's purity reached its peak. All the impurities were refined by Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian didn't hesitate at all. He immediately condensed his spiritual energy and surrounded the medicinal liquid. Within the medicinal liquid, the appearance of a spiritual elixir gradually began to condense. Crack, crack. The surrounding medicinal fragrance was immediately injected into the spiritual elixir, and countless elixir patterns were engraved on it. These were the unique elixir patterns of a saint-grade spiritual elixir, which represented the identity of the saint-grade spiritual elixir. Every elixir pattern engraved on it was enough to increase the efficacy of the saint-grade spiritual elixir by several fold. 7 patterns. This Jiuyu Life Breaker elixir is indeed an item that countless warriors dream of. It actually reached the level of 7 patterns. The refinement of the Jiuyu Life Breaker elixir was finally completed. When Chu Fengmian saw that there were a total of 7 patterns on it, he couldn't help but sigh. Saint-grade spiritual elixirs had 1 to 9 patterns, with 9 patterns being the highest. A 7-pattern saint-grade spiritual elixir was considered an extremely high-grade item among the saint-grade spiritual elixirs. With this Jiuyu Life Breaker elixir, Chu Fengmian could already be ranked among the top alchemists of the 9 regions. However, Chu Fengmian wasn't interested in admiring it now. The battle dragon bloodline in his body, the ancient battle dragon phantom, was already thirsting for the Jiuyu Life Breaker elixir. He was almost unable to endure it anymore. Chu Fengmian's strength had already reached its limit, and his body was already about to break through again. Swallow. Chu Fengmian didn't hesitate at all. He immediately swallowed the Jiuyu Life Breaker elixir. The moment Chu Fengmian swallowed the Jiuyu Life Breaker elixir, the medicinal efficacy of the elixir was completely integrated into his body. Chapter 884. Chu Fengmian's body suddenly began to surge with a powerful force. Chu Fengmian's body and his battle dragon bloodline were surging. Chu Fengmian felt that the bottleneck in his body that had not been broken for a long time was finally loosening again. Sure enough, this Jiuyu Life Breaker pill is worthy of being a 7-mark sacred pill. This force is enough to loosen my bottleneck. Chu Fengmian could clearly feel the changes in his body. The battle dragon shadow had already begun to crave the spiritual energy. It was like a big eater that was starving. Chu Fengmian's spiritual energy was sucked dry in an instant, but it was still far from satisfying his hunger. Fortunately, Chu Fengmian was already prepared. He had saved up countless spirit stones just for this moment. Blood Sea. Come out. Chu Fengmian suddenly opened the empty ring, which contained the blood sea obtained from Dragon Emperor Yen Gu's Mansion D. The blood sea was simply an ocean of spiritual energy. The moment the battle dragon shadow in Chu Fengmian's body saw the blood sea, it frantically drilled into it. In the center of the blood sea, it turned into an incomparably huge whirlpool. It devoured the surrounding blood sea and continuously absorbed the spiritual energy in the blood sea. 50,001 drops. 50,002 drops. In Chu Fengmian's body, the 50,000 drops of ancient battle dragon blood essence that he had not used for a long time condensed again. Chu Fengmian could feel that his body and his strength were crazily expanding. However, the growth of this force was extremely slow, as if it was still suppressing Chu Fengmian's body. The bottleneck in Chu Fengmian's body had not been completely broken. Not enough. This is far from enough. Chu Fengmian could clearly feel that the bottleneck in his body had only opened a small hole. If he wanted to break through, this was far from enough. He needed more strength. Jiuyu Sacred Fruit. Chu Fengmian waved his hand, and the remaining 67 Jiuyu Sacred Fruits appeared directly, floating in the air. He suddenly grabbed one of the Jiuyu Sacred Fruits and directly swallowed it. Waves of spiritual energy began to be refined from Chu Fengmian's body again. Not enough. It's not enough. Chu Fengmian swallowed another 4 or 5 fruit. However, he still felt that there was a bottleneck in Chu Fengmian's body. Chu Fengmian had long known that with his monstrous aptitude, it would be extremely difficult for him to break through. However, he did not expect that even after refining this Jiuyu life-breaking pill, he was still unable to break through. Chu Fengmian's aptitude was simply too monstrous. Even throughout the history of the 9 domains, there were very few people as monstrous as Chu Fengmian. Even the heavens would be jealous of such monstrous geniuses. That was why it was so difficult for Chu Fengmian to break through. Devour them all. Chu Fengmian opened his mouth and devoured the fruits one by one. This single fruit was enough to allow a peak life and death realm martial artist to easily break through. However, Chu Fengmian had devoured 30 to 40 of them in a row, yet his cultivation base was still stuck at the peak of life and death realm. Boom! Boom! The spiritual power in Chu Fengmian's body had reached its limit. If Chu Fengmian failed to break through this time, he would most likely be stuffed to death by his own power. When Chu Fengmian devoured the last jade dew sacred fruit, a kacha sound suddenly came from Chu Fengmian's body. This kacha sound, it seemed to represent the shackles that had been binding Chu Fengmian for a long time. His bottleneck had finally been broken. Boom! The devouring speed of the whirlpool in the blood sea instantly increased by several hundred times, no, several thousand times. An endless amount of spiritual power was devoured into Chu Fengmian's body. I've finally broken through the bottleneck. Chu Fengmian's eyes revealed some joy. The bottleneck that had been binding Chu Fengmian for a long time was finally broken. This was much more difficult than Chu Fengmian had imagined. If Chu Fengmian only relied on the power of the jade dew life-breaking pill, he would not be able to break through the bottleneck. However, Chu Fengmian had to devour 66 jade dew sacred fruits before he could break through the bottleneck. This time, I really have to thank the Ancestor Emperor and Su Emperor. Chu Fengmian's eyes were extremely cold. If it wasn't for the Ancestor Emperor and Su Emperor's continuous pursuit, Chu Fengmian wouldn't have been able to leave the Divine Tree secret realm. Chu Fengmian wouldn't have found the secret of the Divine Tree and obtained so many jade dew sacred fruit. From this point of view, Chu Fengmian was indeed going to repay the two of them. The Ancestor Emperor and Su Emperor had chased Chu Fengmian for so long. It was time for Chu Fengmian to repay them. Walala! The speed at which the ancient war dragon's shadow condensed the ancient war dragon's blood essence was simply terrifying. Drops of ancient war dragon's blood essence fell into the ancient war dragon's shadow like rain. This time, no matter how fast the whirlpool in the blood sea was devouring, Chu Fengmian no longer felt like he was about to burst. The only feeling Chu Fengmian had now was carefree. It was like a person who had been shackled for a long time and finally broke through the shackles one day. Chu Fengmian's aura was changing with every passing moment. It was growing stronger with every passing moment. The blood sea is going to be devoured completely? Chu Fengmian looked at the empty ring and noticed. In the empty ring, the seemingly endless blood sea was gradually shrinking under the devouring of the whirlpool. At this rate, even the blood sea would be devoured completely. The war dragon's skill is really a glutton. The spiritual power contained in the blood sea is enough to establish a sect. It's even enough to support forces like the 7 major sects for 100 years. Now, it's all being devoured. Chu Fengmian couldn't help but sigh. If other martial artists were to cultivate the war dragon skill, no one would be able to satisfy the devouring of the war dragon skill. However, this time, Chu Fengmian would let the war dragon skill devour as much as he wanted. Chu Fengmian suddenly waved his hand and a long river of spiritual stones suddenly appeared in front of him. The long river of spiritual stones was densely packed with hundreds of millions of spiritual stones. Every single one of them was a royal-grade spiritual stone. All of them were condensed by Chu Fengmian using the power of the divine vein. He had been accumulating them all this time. This time, it was finally time to use them. Chapter 885. All the treasures, all the wondrous items in the world, come out. Chu Fengmian opened almost all the spatial rings he had. All the wondrous items he had obtained from the ruins of End and the treasures in Cloud Feather Palace flew out one after another. All of them fell into the incomparably huge vortex in the sky. Chu Fengmian's accumulation all this time finally came in handy at this moment. As the vortex continued to devour, Chu Fengmian's power grew by a notch. Carefree. Chu Fengmian hadn't felt so carefree in a long time. Chu Fengmian's current strength was completely incomparable to his previous strength. It was unknown how many times stronger he was now. Even now, it was still expanding with every passing moment. 2 hours later, the incomparably huge vortex finally began to slow down. All of Chu Fengmian's spirit stones, all of his accumulation, were completely devoured by the vortex. Only then did the vortex gradually disappear. It's done. Chu Fengmian's spiritual power gradually began to converge and return to calmness. Chu Fengmian had finally transcended life and death and become an old ancestor. Moreover, he wasn't an ordinary old ancestor. After devouring so much spiritual power, Chu Fengmian's realm had leaped to the third step of the life and death steps, the immortal realm. Once he broke through, he actually broke through 3 realms in a row. If any martial artist outside knew about this, they would feel that it was a little shocking. In the entire 9 regions, only Chu Fengmian, who cultivated the battle dragon art, could do so. However, Chu Fengmian's strength wasn't just because of his realm. Chu Fengmian wasn't an ordinary immortal realm old ancestor. When he was at the peak of life and death steps, he could already kill an old ancestor at the 6th step of the life and death steps, the heart-refining realm. Now that Chu Fengmian had transcended life and death, his true strength was probably stronger than 100 immortal realm old ancestors combined. Even if he faced an emperor, an ancestor emperor, Chu Fengmian was confident that he could directly kill the two without relying on the Sword Emperor Palace. Moreover, Chu Fengmian had countless fortuitous encounters. The ancestral dragon supreme sword, the battle dragon treasure carriage, and even the emperor jar. These were all supreme spirit tools of the 9 domains. When Chu Fengmian was at the peak of life and death realm, he was far from being able to display the true power of these spirit tools. Now that Chu Fengmian's realm had advanced and his strength had increased, the power of these spiritual weapons was completely different from before. It could be said that the current Chu Fengmian was many times more terrifying than the Chu Fengmian of the past. The current Chu Fengmian could crush him to death with a single finger. This change in cultivation level made Chu Fengmian's strength completely different from before. 66,000 drops of primordial war dragon blood essence. Chu Fengmian sensed the power contained in his battle dragon bloodline. This primordial battle dragon's blood essence was the true source of Chu Fengmian's power. Chu Fengmian now possessed almost half of the primordial war dragon's power. Vaguely, Chu Fengmian could feel that the distance between him and the completion of the first level of the battle dragon art was no longer so illusory. Chu Fengmian felt that as long as he reached the peak of the life and death steps, the immortal realm, he would be able to complete the first level of the battle dragon art. Chu Fengmian couldn't help but think of the time when he met Xing Xian in the pool. At that time, he was barely able to condense the first drop of primordial war dragon's blood essence. As for condensing all 129,600 drops of primordial war dragon's blood essence, it was simply illusory. Now, Chu Fengmian finally saw hope. With my current strength, it should be enough to subdue that young divine tree. Chu Fengmian stood up, his face already filled with confidence. For Chu Fengmian, who was at life and death realm back then, it was almost impossible to subdue this young divine tree. But this time, it was completely different. Chu Fengmian's figure moved and stood up. All the spirit stones and spirit herbs in front of him had been consumed. Chu Fengmian was now a pauper. But now that he could break through, it didn't matter even if he became a pauper. Now that Chu Fengmian's realm had increased, the speed at which his divine veins communicated with spiritual energy was also countless times faster than before. As long as Chu Fengmian was willing, he could condense countless spirit stones in the blink of an eye. With some time, he could accumulate enough wealth for the grand competition. Moreover, as long as he had power, wealth could be obtained at any time. There's actually a jade dew sacred fruit left. Chu Fengmian looked at the lonely jade dew sacred fruit in front of him. It was when he swallowed the last jade dew sacred fruit that he broke through the bottleneck in his body. Therefore, Chu Fengmian didn't devour this jade-dew sacred fruit. Chu Fengmian glanced at it, then put it back into his spatial ring. Chong. Although the jade-dew sacred fruit was useless to him, it was still very useful to other warriors. Chu Fengmian wouldn't give the desolate ancient sect a chance to become an old ancestor. Chu Fengmian disappeared from his spot and appeared in front of the young divine tree in the next moment. This time, when he felt the young divine tree's spiritual energy, Chu Fengmian was no longer as fearful as before. He could feel that the young divine tree's power was now on the same level as his. Suppress. Chu Fengmian condensed his spiritual energy and transformed it into a huge palm. He slammed it towards the young divine tree. Just like before, a layer of green spiritual energy appeared around the young divine tree. When Chu Fengmian came into contact with this layer of green spiritual energy, his body was smashed to pieces and he almost died. But this time, Chu Fengmian didn't panic at all. He pointed his finger and the layer of green spiritual energy shattered like a deflated balloon. Don't struggle. I've subdued you. In the future, you will follow me to the peak and even establish the glory of the desolate ancient sect. Surrender. Chu Fengmian said coldly. Waves of energy suppressed the young divine tree. The young divine tree was still very immature. It could only instinctively use its spiritual energy to condense green spiritual energy and attack Chu Fengmian. But this kind of attack was like a tickle to Chu Fengmian. It easily shattered all the green spiritual energy. After a few exchanges, the young divine tree's power was gradually depleted. Chapter 886. The young divine tree had just been born and needed the nourishment of the divine tree. How could it withstand such consumption? Under the suppression of Chu Fengmian's boundless spiritual energy, it gradually gave up resisting. Great! Seeing the young divine tree give up resisting, Chu Fengmian's face was filled with joy. He had been waiting for this moment. Chu Fengmian hurriedly condensed a wave of spiritual energy, turning it into a brand, and directly injected it into the young divine tree. On the heart of the young divine tree, Chu Fengmian's brand was firmly engraved on it. Damn it! Suddenly, a deafening sound resounded from the space within the divine tree. In an instant, an incomparably huge arm suddenly appeared in the air, and abruptly bombarded Chu Fengmian with a palm. The power of this palm came crashing down from the sky, shattering the surrounding space completely. The target of this palm was none other than Chu Fengmian. A supreme expert had suddenly attacked Chu Fengmian. This young divine tree was most likely cultivated by this supreme expert. Now, Chu Fengmian rushed in front of him and actually subdued this young divine tree. How could this supreme expert not be angry? What kind of strength is this? The ultimate realm? Or even the ninth step of the life and death steps, the terrifying immortal realm expert? The moment Chu Fengmian felt this wave of spiritual energy bombarding him, his mind couldn't help but tremble. The power of this palm absolutely surpassed the strength of any expert that Chu Fengmian had seen in this life. It bombarded the air, and he didn't know how far it came from. However, the power of this bombardment was incomparably precise, and its only goal was to kill Chu Fengmian. Battle Dragon Treasure Carriage. Ancestral Dragon Supreme Sword. Chu Fengmian didn't have any time to hesitate. The Battle Dragon Treasure Carriage and the Ancestral Dragon Supreme Sword were taken out by Chu Fengmian. On the Battle Dragon Treasure Carriage, the umbrella suddenly opened, and the seven-colored light turned into a barrier, blocking in front of Chu Fengmian. However, this almost indestructible seven-colored barrier was directly shattered by the power of this palm. The terrifying power of this palm was simply enough to crush everything. In front of this palm, Chu Fengmian's strength was extremely weak. Boom! The terrifying power of the palm hit Chu Fengmian's body on the spot. Chu Fengmian felt that his body was about to be torn apart by the power of this palm. It was as if his body was about to shatter. Invincible War Dragon. Condense. Chu Fengmian roared crazily. The power of the battle dragon bloodline started to boil in Chu Fengmian's body. Chu Fengmian's body, which was about to shatter, was reconstructed and restored. Under the power of the battle dragon bloodline, the torn wound healed immediately. Let's go. Chu Fengmian moved his body and suddenly turned into a beam of light. He gathered the power of creation and broke the barrier around the space. With a leap, he dashed out. The one who did this was definitely a supreme expert from the desolate ancient sect. He might even be an immortal realm expert. Just this palm alone was enough to seriously injure Chu Fengmian. Moreover, this was a palm strike that crossed thousands of miles in the air. Its true power was probably less than 50%. If he were to strike again, the consequences would be unimaginable. Tree of God. Chu Fengmian hurriedly called out to the young tree of God. Suddenly, the young tree of God was uprooted from the ground. It turned into a beam of light and entered Chu Fengmian's body. Chu Fengmian moved his body and directly jumped into the void from the space within the tree of God. However, the moment Chu Fengmian stepped into the void, suddenly another wave of spiritual energy blasted over from the sky. This time, the power of this palm strike was many times more terrifying than the previous one. Obviously, this supreme expert had no intention of letting Chu Fengmian go. In order to cultivate this young tree of God, he had spent a lot of effort. It was a fruit that he had spent a lot of effort to cultivate. Now, Chu Fengmian was plucking it. His anger had reached its peak. The entire void could feel the anger of this supreme expert. Damn it! Damn it! Die, brat! Waves of furious roars swept across the void, stirring up countless gusts of wind and waves. Of course, this was not the most terrifying thing. The most terrifying thing was the palm strike that blasted over again. The power of this palm strike was vividly displayed. It turned into an ocean of spiritual energy. It wanted to engulf Chu Fengmian's body with the enormous spiritual energy. Damn it! Breaking the firmament with a sword. Chu Fengmian suddenly pulled out his sword and gathered all his sword intent on the blade. The power of the 400 supreme sword cheese also merged into the sword edge. He directly faced the attack with his sword. He could not destroy the power of this palm strike. No matter where Chu Fengmian escaped to, he would be hunted down. Boom! Boom! A sword edge broke through the sea abruptly as the two forces collided violently in the void. The collision was so terrifying that no one knew how much of the void was broken. However, in the blink of an eye, the power of this sword was directly devoured. The power of this palm was simply like a vast ocean, endless and limitless. It seemed that no matter how hard he tried to resist, he could not resist it. Damn it! I don't believe that you can kill me! Invincible battle dragon! Bless all of them! The ancestral dragon supreme sword, the battle dragon treasure carriage, and the mysterious black sword formation all turned into countless rays of light and integrated into Chu Fengmian's body. Ancient dragon emperor body. The power of the battle dragon bloodline burst out. It was as if all of Chu Fengmian's foundation had burst out and integrated into Chu Fengmian's body. Boom! Chu Fengmian's body was directly sucked into the sea of spiritual energy. He was almost constantly bombarded by the enormous power. Crack! Crack! Chu Fengmian's body was broken little by little. It was simply a matter of life and death. Boom! However, at this moment, a layer of green spiritual energy suddenly condensed on Chu Fengmian's body. At the same time, Chu Fengmian's body suddenly became incomparably tough. The countless injuries on Chu Fengmian's body were all healed in an instant. What's going on? Is this the power of the divine tree? At this most critical moment, the sudden appearance of the green spiritual energy suddenly alleviated Chu Fengmian's crisis. Chapter 887. Chu Fengmian didn't expect that the divine tree would suddenly burst out with such power and relieve the pressure on him. He saved Chu Fengmian's life. The moment the green spiritual energy appeared, Chu Fengmian felt that his body had become much tougher. The sea of spiritual energy wanted to tear Chu Fengmian's body apart, but it seemed to be powerless. Let's go. Chu Fengmian didn't hesitate and made a prompt decision. His body passed through countless voids and arrived at the 9 domains. With a thought, he communicated with the Cloud Feather Heavenly Palace and returned to it. The moment Chu Fengmian left the void and returned to the 9 domains, he could feel that a terrifying figure was chasing after him from the void. However, Chu Fengmian communicated with Cloud Feather Palace and returned there directly. As long as Chu Fengmian was in Cloud Feather Palace, no matter how powerful the figure was, he couldn't hurt Chu Fengmian. I'm safe. Back in Cloud Feather Palace, Chu Fengmian finally breathed a sigh of relief. Chu Fengmian came to a palace in Cloud Feather Palace and sat on the ground to rest. Chu Fengmian didn't expect that he would be hunted down by such a terrifying old antique. The old antique, who had just chased after Chu Fengmian, was probably an immortal realm expert. He was someone who had reached the end of the 9 steps of life and death. Such a figure was extremely terrifying. As long as he took one more step, he would surpass the 9 steps of life and death and be ranked at the top of the 9 domains. In the 7 major sects, such a figure was a real big shot and was extremely respected. He usually cultivated in seclusion and only appeared occasionally. Now, this old antique suddenly came out of seclusion and angrily attacked Chu Fengmian. It seemed that this young divine tree was deliberately cultivated by this old antique. His purpose should be the same as Chu Fengmian's, to wait for the divine tree to become independent and then subdue it. Therefore, he wanted to control the divine tree's power. He didn't expect that Chu Fengmian would take the first step and subdue the young divine tree. That was why the old antique was so angry. I'm really lucky this time. Chu Fengmian couldn't help but sigh. This time, he went to the divine tree secret realm not only to break through the realm, but also to subdue the young divine tree. This was the greatest opportunity for Chu Fengmian. Especially when he was in a desperate situation just now, it was the sudden burst of the divine tree's power that saved him. Now that he was out of danger, Chu Fengmian sat where he was and released his spiritual awareness to examine his own body. The moment the power of the divine tree burst out, Chu Fengmian felt that his body had suddenly become countless times tougher. Chu Fengmian was also very curious about what exactly had happened. When Chu Fengmian scanned his body with his spiritual awareness, he suddenly froze. He was even a little Fengmian behind his body was in the deepest part of his body, around Chu Fengmian's natal sword origin. The young divine tree was actually planted in this body. Teat the S's head's god, his sa divine's body's body S's divines, S's ants divines. What's happening? This divine tree actually fused with my body? Chu Fengmian was extremely shocked. He never thought that something like this would happen. The divine tree had actually chosen to take root in Chu Fengmian's body and become one with him. After a short moment of shock, Chu Fengmian's face was filled with ecstasy. This was definitely the best thing that could happen. The reason why the Great Desolation was so tough in the past was because the roots of the creation tree covered the entire Great Desolation. Therefore, the primordial era shit was connected as one, and was incomparably tough. Later on, it was also because the creation tree had shattered that the great primordial was forcefully shattered by martial artists. Now, the divine tree had taken root and sprouted from Chu Fengmian's body. Countless roots were scattered all over his body. The scattering of the countless roots made Chu Fengmian's body more than 10 times tougher than before. That was why Chu Fengmian was able to escape from the hands of such a big shot. Moreover, the power of the Tree of God was still extremely weak now. If the Tree of God were to grow in the future, when it grew, Chu Fengmian would be able to use the power of the divine tree to strengthen his body. This fleshly body could possibly grow to an incomparably terrifying level in the future. There were countless ways to strengthen the body, but which one was more terrifying than having a divine tree in one's body? Originally, I didn't know how to use the power of the divine tree. I didn't expect that the divine tree had already fused with my body. Chu Fengmian couldn't help but sigh. This time, it could be considered a blessing in disguise. It was beyond Chu Fengmian's estimation. The divine tree should have sensed danger when that big shot chased after Chu Fengmian. Therefore, the divine tree took the initiative to fuse with Chu Fengmian's body, which was a blessing in disguise. Chu Fengmian didn't expect that the big shot would chase after him and bring him such benefits. Going to the divine tree mystic realm this time, he had made a huge profit. Now that Chu Fengmian's body had fused with the divine tree, his body was 10 times or even dozens of times more terrifying than before. It should be noted that Chu Fengmian's body had been tempered countless times. He had been tempered by tribulation lightning and heavenly crystals, and he also had the bloodline of the war dragon and the body of the ancient dragon king. He was not inferior to those martial artists who cultivated the body. Now, with the support of the divine tree, he was even more powerful by dozens of times. At this moment, Chu Fengmian felt that just by relying on the strength of his physical body, he was strong enough to fight against a ruler of the destiny state and become one of them. With such a body, even an immortal realm big shot wouldn't be able to kill Chu Fengmian easily. Chu Fengmian had simply become an unkillable cockroach. Elder Yun? Why did Elder Yun suddenly disappear? After Chu Fengmian familiarized himself with the situation in his body, he suddenly felt a little strange. This time, when Chu Fengmian returned to the Cloud Feather Palace, Elder Yun, as the spirit of the palace, should have known and appeared early. However, this time, Elder Yun wasn't among them. Just as Chu Fengmian walked out of the palace and was about to look for Elder Yun suddenly appeared in front of him. However, when he looked at Elder Yun, he looked a little tired. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.